A very good morning to everybody. A good evening to those who are joining us from other time zones. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. We have really an outstanding lineup of speakers, and I'd like to express my particular gratitude to them. Yesterday, as you know, the Secretary General launched his roadmap on digital cooperation. The United Nations, from its very outset, has come together to try and guide new technologies for the better and to curtail their harms. As the Secretary General reminded us yesterday, the very first resolution of the General Assembly in 1946 was on the peaceful use of nuclear technology. And very much in that same spirit, the Secretary General launched yesterday the roadmap for digital cooperation. Of course, the mechanisms and approach that we pursued in the atomic era are mechanism and approaches that will not work for the digital era. And I think you'll find a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and very different approaches set out in the roadmap for digital cooperation. Just how important digital is, just how much our world has been transformed and digitalization has advanced, and the line between analog and digital worlds has become blurred. Just how far-reaching that change is, I think, has been brought home to us by the changes to our lives under COVID-19. While our economies have come to a near standstill, while our education of our kids and grandkids has virtually had to cease, while we've had to go into lockdown and isolation, we have, thanks to digital technology, been able to continue. Many of us have been able to continue working. Many of our children have been able to continue to have access to their education, and our lives have been less isolated than they would have been without digital technologies. So we've seen just how life-saving, life-sustaining these technologies are for us. But let's pause for a moment and think about those who don't have access to digital technology. Of course, in the developed world, connectivity is in the region of 87–90%. In the developing world, in the least developed countries, it's less than 1 in 5 of the population who have access to digital technologies. So there we can see that while these technologies have become so important for so many, they also threaten to represent a new face, a new rift in inequality. So we need to steer these technologies. These are technologies that are advanced at a speed like none other before them. And let's be frank, policymakers, those who are charged with protecting the public good at a national level, at regional levels, and at a global level, have had a very hard time keeping pace. But we need now to catch up, and we need, as humanity have done with all previous technologies, to assume our responsibilities, to steer them, and make sure that we maximize the benefits they bring, and maximize those benefits for all, and especially for those who would otherwise be left behind, while containing the harms they potentially bring. And of course, there I'm thinking of the massive increase of cyber attacks that we've witnessed, the greater insecurity, the potential invasions of our privacy, and an area of particular concern to the United Nations and the Secretary General, the spread of dangerous misinformation, stigma, and hate speech. So let's seize the opportunity that the roadmap poses and work together to do our utmost to make these technologies a source of greater cooperation and a source of greater good and sustainable development. We cannot let technology be corrupted and used for harm. We cannot let digital technology divide the human race further between those who can benefit from connection and those who can't. And we cannot let these technologies be used on an unprecedented scale to abuse and exclude and spread hatred. And that's what the roadmap is about. It's about coming together across stakeholder groups to provide steerage in ways that are appropriate and feasible in the 21st century. So today and on Monday, we'll be going into much greater detail around the individual recommendations. And we will be going through the 8 blocks of recommendations that there are in the report, and we'll have the opportunity to dwell on each of them. But we're honored to start today, before we go into the first recommendation on universal connectivity, to have 3 very distinguished speakers. First, the AU Commissioner, Commissioner Abu Zaid, then the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has been a very early advocate on making the digital world human rights compliant, Madame Michelle Bachelet, and then the UNDP administrator, Achim Steiner, who has not only been a champion of digital finance, but is also reorienting UNDP to be able to provide support to developing countries in reaching the full potential of digital technology to boost sustainable development. So allow me then to give the floor to Commissioner Abu Zaid. Sir, thank you so much Madam, thank you so much for joining us. Madam Abu Zaid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Under-Secretary General. It is really a true pleasure. I'm delighted to be with you today and grateful for the invitation. Allow me at the outset to congratulate the United Nations and the high-level panel for the excellent report, and it shows that great efforts and really brilliant ideas. So that's a commendable initiative and work. The roadmap for digital cooperation is without a doubt an important milestone to pave the way for an overarching global strategy to harness the opportunities of digital technologies and address their impacts for the achievement of sustainable development goals. Digital inclusion, connectivity, AI, human rights, trust and security in the digital age are all at the heart of Africa's digital agenda. So I'm really glad to note the alignment with the global trend. Establishing a shared vision on these issues fosters cooperation among nations and ensures equal access to the opportunities digitalization presents. Africa, as you know, has the potential to become a key player in the global digital economy. Home to a population of 1.3 billion, majority of whom are young people, Africa is poised for a digital transformation that could bend the arc of history and provide much-needed job opportunities to millions of young people, innovative solutions to Africa's development problems, and help the continent leapfrog. Even though huge progress on digital access has been made in Africa, the continent as a whole still has a long way to go. Africa, true, has the fastest internet penetration rate, yet only 1/3 of its population is connected. We are still challenged by low levels of digital literacy, patchy infrastructure, high cost of internet services. Power availability is scarce, with vast rural areas that are not connected to power grids, as well as frequent blackouts in major urban areas. Digital divide in Africa is linked not only to gender biases, geographic location, or affordable access to the internet, but also usage and usage benefit and the lack of local content in natural languages. Excellencies, distinguished participants. Africa is determined to tackle these challenges and recognizes that digitalization is the infrastructure of the 21st century. Earlier this year, African heads of states and governments adopted the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa. It guides a common, coordinated digitalization agenda for the continent that enhances synergies and joint actions towards realization of Africa's socioeconomic aspirations, and as a prerequisite for us to meet the goals of our Agenda 2063 as well as SDGs. You mentioned it, Mr. Undersecretary General. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic became the single biggest catalyst for digital transformation in Africa. It is no longer an aspiration or a value addition, but a lifeline and a new norm. That is why in African Union's response to implications of the pandemic, development and implementation of digital solutions and technologies are being fast-tracked. Projects for digital connectivity and skills are prioritized with the aim of building digitally enabled resilience and a smart recovery. Excellencies, distinguished participants, digitalization is a wonderful tool, but can also turn into an obstacle or even a threat if not properly guided. Lack of interoperability and harmonized norms can hinder continental or global initiatives. Cyber attacks can wither our efforts and threaten individuals and nations. Thus, we have a big task in hand, not just at the level of countries or regions, but also globally. The international community must work hand in hand to bridge technical and policy silos and develop international norms, principles, and frameworks to help humanity at this critical juncture. The African Union Commission welcomes the proposed architecture for global digital cooperation and stands ready to join hands with all partners for the benefit of Africa and indeed the world. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam. Thank you so much. And we are inspired by many of the measures that have been taken in the digital sphere on the African continent. I think there's much we can learn, and we're very encouraged also by the level of commonality there is in our approaches. So thank you for that, and we look very much forward to continuing to work closely together. I'd now like to give the floor to Madam Bachelet, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has been a very consistent and eloquent advocate on the topic of online rights. Madam Bachelet.
Thank you, Fabricio. Excellencies, colleagues, I'm pleased to address you today as we move forward towards the implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation, and great roadmap, by the way. The roadmap is our collective guide to ensure digital technologies better serve humanity. It can also guide us at the United Nations as we strengthen our efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and protect the human rights of all. The COVID-19 pandemic has made us more reliant on these technologies, and together with recent demonstrations around the world against the gross racial injustice, the pandemic is a striking reminder of existing inequalities and of the potential consequences of those inequalities for human rights, peace and security, and development. The digital revolution is about all of us. The inclusive approaches of the Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation and the virtual roundtables co-led by the UN, member states, and civil society organizations have been essential. Their multi-stakeholders inclusive model was remarkable in breaking down silos. And as we look towards our 75th anniversary and how we can leverage digital technology to shape our future together, it may also offer a reflection on how a future UN may operate. My office has been working alongside the Republic of Korea, the European Union, and the NGO Access Now as co-champions of the high-level panel report recommendation 3A and 3B related to human rights. I thank them for their collaboration, as well as that of over 40 stakeholders who took part in our virtual roundtable process. Human rights concerns and opportunities, however, cut across all of the recommendations of the high-level panel report on digital cooperation. Keeping human rights central to all efforts to implement the report will be crucial to ensuring meaningful impact in relation to digital connectivity, digital inclusion, artificial intelligence, trust and security, digital cooperation architecture, and other issues. Excellencies, colleagues, the vision and recommended actions emerging from this consultative process are closely aligned with the Secretary General's call to action for human rights earlier this year, especially its highlighted new frontiers on human rights. My office is currently working closely with more than 30 other UN entities on the implementation of the call to action. We should join up those efforts with work to implement the roadmap. Both the Secretary General's roadmap and his call to action underscore the fundamental importance of member states placing, and I will quote him, I quote the roadmap, human rights at the center of regulatory framework and legislation in the development and use of digital technologies, including artificial intelligence-powered technologies. In that context, it is important that the Human Rights Council and the Special President mandate holders continue and expand their roles in reviewing and providing guidance on how human rights standards and principles apply in the digital space, in particular to governance frameworks. The private sector also has a crucial role to play in making clear commitments to respecting human rights in the development of new technologies. My office is deeply engaging with tech companies with regard to the application of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights when designing, developing, and deploying tech products, policies, practices, and terms of service. We will progressively share the result of this work over the coming months and hopefully years. Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, the Secretary General's roadmap also compels us to look internally. It is crucial that the UN lead by example, serving as a model for member states, tech companies, and others in carrying out human rights due diligence in our own use of digital technologies and our own data protection and privacy policies and procedures. As the SDG's call to action points out, within the United Nations, human rights must be fully considered in all decision-making, cooperation, and institutional commitment. UN entities should routinely carry out human rights impact assessment before and during the employment of new technology in operation and program. My office looks forward to working with other members of the UN family and external stakeholders in developing system-wide guidance. Simply put, digital technology are here to stay. They hold an enormous potential to help us build a better future for all, but they also bring many risks, as the roadmap clearly states. The roadmap calls upon all of us, the UN, member states, civil society, and the private sector, to work together in new and inclusive ways to make sure we seize the many opportunities digital technologies present into the common good while avoiding potential threats. My office looks forward to continuing work with you all in this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Bachelet, also for reminding us both of the threats and of the potential and the need to put human rights at the center of our work on digital technologies. I'd now like to give the floor to the UNDP Administrator, Achim Steiner. Achim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fabrizio, and good morning to you, and good afternoon to my dear colleagues, Commissioner Abu Zaid and High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet. It's a great pleasure to join you, and in fact, my experience this morning is indeed one of digital opportunities sometimes being surprisingly present in different ways. I have to address you through my cell phone because my internet provider this morning informed me that they have to do some maintenance, so there was a quick scramble. Forgive me for the slight improvisation, but it's good to be with you, particularly in the launch of the SG's roadmap on digital cooperation. Both the Commissioner and the High Commissioner have spoken to the relevance of the topic at large, to what happens next in development at large. And as the head of the United Nations Development Program for the last 3 years, I have very much tried to, with my teams, begin to understand the implications of the digital frontier, that fourth industrial revolution in the larger context for development, in particular also for opportunities, but as the SG's roadmap on digital cooperation has been so clearly focused on how to get it right. We live in unprecedented times. Things are happening right now on the digital frontier in countries, developed, developing, poor countries with limited infrastructure, countries with very highly developed digital infrastructure that we could not have imagined even 6 months ago. There are time horizons of 5 to 10 years of innovation and introduction of new platforms that were envisaged with those who were looking at the future of digital technology in development and in communications. And what we have seen just in the last, I would say 12, 16 weeks is a compression in terms of time. These technologies being rushed forward and fast forwarded to the point where massive cash transfer schemes are being set up, where communication platforms are being mobilized, and where the whole frontier of digital leapfrogging becomes not just an aspirational concept, it is happening around us as we speak. And that is embedded in far larger changes that are happening also, whether it is in the world of cryptocurrency, in terms of cyber crime. So clearly, this issue and the SG's focus with the roadmap on digital cooperation, I think is extremely timely. We have to get it right. And there are extraordinary potentials. But as the panel also outlined and highlighted, and something that we also learned in UNDP's Human Development Report of 2019 last year, which identified the digital dimension of the future of development as one of the great variables that will either create more inequalities or reduce inequality. And I think looked at it through that lens, the digital gap and also the digital divides are something that are a fact of life in today's societies and economies, but if addressed with the right policies, with the right focus, with the right inclusive perspective, then I think a citizen-oriented and particularly a inclusive approach to digital cooperation becomes truly a driver. And getting that right is where the roadmap really has focused, and it has highlighted building the greater shared understanding of concepts of privacy and security in the digital environment, using digital tools in accordance with the principles of human rights, which you have already spoken to, Michel, not pushing one-size-fits-all solutions, to Commissioner Armani's points also, and helping governments and society at large embrace the benefits of digital while managing the economic, social, and environmental risks, and ensuring the needs of those furthest left behind are met, including those on the other side of the digital divide. What I think COVID-19 in particular has illustrated in such a dramatic form is that those who were already off the grid, off the internet, not really connected to that economy that we often describe as the 21st century economy, they have suddenly been found to be even worse off. They are truly left behind. And if you just think of the school children, well over 1 billion across the world, who currently in very different ways are coping with the lockdowns and the fact that schools are closed, was also a stark reminder that your future as a child in today's world is determined by so many factors, but certainly also by where you live and how your access to internet will determine your ability to continue learning. So as UNDP, we warmly welcome the roadmap. We have been very actively working with you. And again, thank you, Fabrizio, for facilitating this process to come to this roadmap on digital cooperation. And I also want to very much acknowledge our partnership with the ITU, because together with them as co-champions, we work very closely together. And the joint facility partnership that we are developing with the ITU that will look particularly at specific services on capacity building, complementary to the overall UN system efforts, because we're approaching that digital universe from many different entry points. We also collaborate with UNICEF very closely and the UN Innovation Network. There are many, many frontiers, including with UNCTAD also on the e-commerce front, which has proven to be such an important coping mechanism in the middle of these lockdowns. I want to end by just making one more reference to another part of the Secretary General's focus on this issue. He commissioned roughly a year ago, a high-level task force on digital finance and the SDGs, which I'm very honored to co-chair with Maria Ramos, the former CEO of Absa Bank in South Africa, and I, together with a remarkable group of members of this task force, where we have focused on trying to understand how digital finance, that whole universe of finance, both in terms of institutions, but also digital finance, new platforms, cryptocurrencies, and the possibility also of being able to find more inclusive, more citizen-centered approaches in this new unfolding world of digital finance could allow us to have a financial sector that is more focused on co-investing in the SDGs, in public good outcomes. And that report will be presented to the Secretary General in July and forms another part of the UN's efforts to understand, first of all, what the implications of all of this are, but also what our role alongside governments, alongside the private sector, alongside citizens, could be in addressing capital markets to take SDGs into account, channeling domestic savings into sustainable infrastructure, reducing illicit flows, just to mention a few examples. So I end, Fabrizio, by joining my two previous speakers in, first of all, reaffirming the centrality of this issue to what happens next in development, and also that it is truly part of a capacity to respond in the immediate sense, but also a view and a vision to how we can build back better, more inclusive, more responsive economies. Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you for reminding us of just how critical this technology is to ensuring economic inclusion and reminding us of the critical work you're doing, leading the task force on digital finance, with whom we have been coordinating and speaking in the composition of the roadmap, and also reminding us how critical it is to other aspects of development, like education. And this roadmap was a joint effort, and we're deeply grateful to UNDP, OHCHR, and many others who made it what it is. We now go into the first focus area of the recommendations. And as I suggested yesterday, and I think it's come out from the interventions of our previous high-level speakers, the first, second, and third priority for digital cooperation has to be achieving universal connectivity. Some have pointed out that this technology is more democratic than previous technologies. If we think of automobiles, how long did it take for automobiles to be accessible to the majority of humanity? It took literally decades. If we think about electricity, it also took a very long time. On the whole, technology gains tend to benefit a small minority for many years. But in the case of digital technology, it has spread faster than any other. It has reached half of humanity in just 25 years. That's never happened with a new technology before. But having said that, that still leaves another half of humanity out. And those inequalities and lack of access has many different faces. As Commissioner Abu Zaid reminded us, sometimes it's highlighted in a rural-urban divide. In many places, including in the developed world, it's often highlighted in a difference in connectivity between men and women. I think globally, women are about 26% less connected than men. And then it can also take the face of a divide in access due to language barriers. So there are a number. I think this has to be our largest priority. And it will take a comprehensive set of measures. There is no magic bullet through which to secure universal connectivity. First, we need to have a baseline to define what we mean by acceptable levels of connectivity and what we mean by affordable connectivity. In many countries, networks are there. The internet is accessible, but it remains inaccessible, not for lack of infrastructure, but for lack of affordability. So we need, first of all, to establish the metrics, because without the metrics, it's very clear to have very difficult to know what we're talking about and have strategies to respond, to identify and respond to the gaps. So the first set of recommendations in the report is around establishing those metrics and baselines. And then the next is to look at the costing. We don't know what we mean by universal affordable access, so it's very difficult to cost. But for Africa alone, I think the figure has been advanced that it would take about $100 billion to achieve universal connectivity. And we need to look at the cost globally. And then we need to look at financial packages. And it's clear that it's going to take efforts and investments from the private sector, from governments, from international financial institutions, from bilateral donors to achieve this. So we need to put together a platform that can come up with the necessary finance. And then we need to make sure that there's an enabling regulatory environment. I've been very struck that in many cases, the issue of connectivity is less of an infrastructure challenge, as one would be inclined to think, and more of a problem around adequate regulatory frameworks, adequate taxation frameworks, and issues around affordability. So there are also recommendations in that regard. And finally, we need to boost some of the models that are working. There is UNICEF with ITU has pioneered a model called GIGA, which is about connecting all schools everywhere. And that is a model that we can build on, and we need to find other such models and boost them. So those are those are the set of recommendations in brief in the report. But we're lucky to have two very distinguished speakers to introduce the theme in more detail. We have Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF, who has been a very early champion of digital technologies and has really placed UNICEF at the forefront of innovation in the UN system, and the rest of us are trying to catch up, inspired by UNICEF. And then we also have the Secretary General of the ITU, Hulin Zhao, who has been the inspiration and and we've learned very much and worked very much with ITU in putting this roadmap together, and is of course the repository of expertise and has been doing capacity building in this area for many years in the UN system. So with that, I'd like to give the floor first to Madam Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF, and then to Mr. Hulin Zhao. So Henrietta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio, and thank you very much for the roadmap. It really is very good. So thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'd like to follow in and to build on the comments that we have heard from Michelle, from Akim, from Amani Abu Zaid, but also Fabrizio, to your comments about how fast the technology has moved. It is not like automobiles, it is not like electricity, but it is moving fast. But if we can catch this wave, we can really change the world together. So we've been very proud to be part of this report, and I would like to focus on two areas that are particularly critical to our work at UNICEF to try to connect children and young people. Connectivity and public goods recommendations 1A and 1B in the report. So the COVID pandemic has demonstrated the importance of both. It has also exposed how much work we have to do to ensure that every child in every community will benefit. Quite simply, if you are not connected, you lose out on education, on opportunities, and on choice. And with 50% of the global population, 3.6 billion people, having no connection at all, we have our work cut out for us. On connectivity, we must continue our work to expand affordable access, exactly to your point, Fabrizio, to digital networks in three ways. First, the GIGA partnership to connect every school in the world to the internet. This collaboration between UNICEF and ITU is yielding some impressive results. New agreements with Kazakhstan and Rwanda, as well as the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, will help us drive digital cooperation so we can expand connectivity to 35 countries in all. We've also mapped the location and the connectivity status of over 800,000 schools in 25 countries, and we'll have the first 1 million schools mapped by the end of 2020. To respond to COVID, we've accelerated our work to provide digital connectivity to support remote learning in 13 countries. And we're now starting to connect the first 1,000 schools in each country and 2.6 million children. We're also working with the international financial institutions, what we affectionately call the IFIs, to generate specific funds to scale up all of this work, including COVID-19 response. And second, once connected, we must ensure that children have access to the right tools. Our education team is working closely with global partners to design and to deliver these tools. We've joined forces with Microsoft and the Cambridge University on what we call the Learning Passport. It's an online platform. It gives children and youth access to their school curriculum online, pardon me, wherever they are, including textbooks and instructions in their own national language. It began as a tool to provide remote learning for displaced and refugee children. But now we're expanding that platform, opening it to school districts around the world, including Kosovo and Timor-Leste and Ukraine. And it's a great example of the third need, bringing the private sector into our work. Through our Generation Unlimited partnership that all of us in the United Nations are a part of, we are working with businesses like Telenor and ARM to mobilize resource and support for connectivity, to expand the development and sharing of digital public goods, recommendation 1B in the report. May I particularly thank our partners, the governments of Norway, of Sierra Leone, and the Indian Innovation Tank, that is iSpirit. They are all leading this Digital Public Goods Alliance. And together we're creating a go-to platform that will present vetted, open source, digital public goods around key areas like learning, health and job skills. And we are bringing together the best tools, talent, and ideas through communities of practice. The countries are taking the lead in creating local solutions that meet the needs of their communities while building them as digital public goods, ensuring that the solutions can be easily scaled across countries. In Sierra Leone, for example, IDT Labs and the government have created a digital platform to the delivery of social protection payments like cash transfers. In Niger's Smart Villages program, they are scaling up digital access and tools for hard-to-reach communities, supporting communities' health and education. And in Jordan, they are putting in place digital goods that are based around digital literacy and self-employment tools for young people. In fact, UNICEF sees digital goods as an essential area of work to help young people acquire the skills and training that they will need. Our venture fund has been investing in startups and program countries, including on the digital side. And with Generation Unlimited, we'll be announcing shortly a group of 11 companies who will join forces to help young people build skills and increase their employment opportunities. Once again, we're working closely with the IFIs throughout this work to create a seamless flow of funding for digital public goods and to bring them to scale in communities around the world. Throughout all of this work, we count on our partners to join us. So from all of us on the GIGA team, on Generation Unlimited Partnership, the Digital Public Goods Alliance, please have your teams reach out to us and see if we can work together in all these areas. As a UN family, let's learn from this very good report. Let's adapt our work and our partnerships, not to the world of tomorrow, but to the world of today, a world that is driven by connectivity. And let's make sure that children and young people can benefit, no matter who they are, no matter where they live. Thank you very much, Fabrizio.
Thank you so much. And again, all we can do is support your leadership in this area on universal connectivity and digital public goods. And I do believe the ultimate measuring stick for the success of this roadmap will be the extent to which it can contribute to children everywhere being more connected, and especially those who lack it now. And with that, Henrietta, allow me to pass the floor now to Mr. Hulin Chao, whose office we cooperated very closely in the development of the roadmap. Hulin, the floor is yours.
Fabrizio, it's great to join you today. I just finished my virtual consultation of the councillors and quickly rushed into this room to join you. The cooperation between government and the industry has driven the work of ITU for more than 155 years. And in ITU, we not only have 193 member states, but we also have more than 900 companies, big companies, famous companies such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all these names, and also from Asia side, you have Alibaba. These new guys, quickly joined ITU in addition to those classic telecom companies. Now, it is at the heart of the important work ITU is doing to harmonize the global use of radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbits, and to develop global standards on communication technologies and services, and to assist the developing countries with infrastructure and policy development. Cooperation among ITU members and partners, including our sister UN agencies, is also central to ITU's multi-stakeholder response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the UN Secretary General Guterres emphasized yesterday and said in a video message to ITU's World Telecommunication and Information Society in May, the international cooperation on digital technology is essential to help defeat COVID-19 and achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Leaving no one behind is at the core of the 2030 Agenda. And he even mentioned that by 2030, he'd like to see everybody connected with affordable price. Yet today, only half of the world's population is using the internet. Hundreds of millions of new users come to join us over the years, but according to our statistics, last year alone, 2019, with the old world efforts, we achieved around 1% improvement of connectivity of internet usage. And if we think about the remaining 46% of people not connected online yet, how far we can go and how can we get them connected. So that is a big challenge to us. Now it's time to review our strategy and business models based on the lessons learned from this COVID-19 to speed up the development of a digital society and accelerate the progress toward building the digital divide. We have entered a decade of action with less about 10 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and how populations still to be connected. ITU is redoubling its efforts to leave no one behind offline. Let me give you a few concrete examples. ITU's World Radio Communication Conference 2019, WRC 2019, held last year in Egypt, assigned additional spectrum to the satellite business and to 5G services, and which could help us to improve our telecom extension to those poor area and not connected area. We have all seen how important remote learning has been during this coronavirus crisis. With the GIGA partnership, ITU and UNICEF, my colleague Arieta just mentioned, and others have committed to connecting every school to the internet and every young person to information, opportunity, and choice. This initiative supports the roadmap's goals to universal connectivity at the national, regional, and international levels. And recently, we also joined UNESCO for their e-learning program, and to try to strengthen our, efforts to support the children who suffered from this COVID-19. The lack of infrastructure is a major barrier to universal connectivity, and that is why creating better environment for investment in ICT infrastructure and promoting an enabling regulatory environment are among my key priorities. To that end, I'm pleased to announce that ITU will launch prior to the G20 Digital Minister meeting in July, the Connecting Humanity to the Internet by 2030 study, which analyzes the investments needed to achieve universal affordable broadband by 2030 in all countries of the world. So next month, we will also release a last mile connectivity toolkit. There are other barriers to universal connectivity, including the lack of affordability. A new ITU ICT price trends report shows that even as average prices are broadly continuing to fall, broadband services can still be too expensive for the poorest consumers. I'm pleased that the roadmap highlights the need to provide affordable access to digital networks to every adult by 2030, and the importance of trusted metrics to measure progress. And Secretary General Guterres also highlighted the importance of this point yesterday. ITU is committed to analysis and establishing a baseline of digital connectivity that individuals need to access the online space, as well as a definition for affordability with universal targets and metrics. Let me finally mention capacity building. ITU welcomes the roadmap's acknowledgement of the need for digital capacity building as an absolute prerequisite for achieving real and sustainable progress, including in terms of universal affordable access. As noted in the roadmap, ITU has been teaming up with UNDP to implement an initial mapping of existing digital capacity building initiatives to assess gaps and inform forward-looking solutions. Building on this effort, ITU is ready to work with UNDP to help in the creation of a joint facility for digital capacity development to help provide services in areas ranging from digital readiness to digital literacy and skill training. And ITU recently also cooperated with IAO to have capacity buildings for youth. And we launched this project earlier from February to start from Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the roadmap, the report of the UN Secretary General is a significant milestone in achieving better digital cooperation globally. It comes at a time when the need to cooperate to address today's crisis and prepare for recovery is more important than ever before. ITU looks forward to strengthening cooperation with all interested stakeholders, including the future tech envoy to be designated by the UN Secretary General in 2021. We welcome the report's recognition of ITU's valuable contribution to today's digital transformation and reaffirm our commitment to transforming this digital revolution into a development revolution for all. So let us seize this moment to increase digital. I saw Fabrizio look at his watch. The digital cooperation across borders and sectors and accelerate the development of digital society. So let us redouble our efforts and learn from the lessons from COVID-19 to ensure that ICTs are beneficial to all and that no one is left behind. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your rich intervention, and we look forward to working very closely together in our common endeavors. Now we will have some brief interventions by different discussants on this topic, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague, one of our very distinguished team members who've been really the big achievers in putting together the roadmap. Yu Ping, if you could, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio. Right now, we're going to go to discussants for universal connectivity. And we are honored to have as our first discussant, please speak for 2 minutes if we can kindly request that. And I will be staring not just at my watch, but also at the screen very angrily if we don't stick to 2 minutes, because we have many, many distinguished speakers coming after, and we'd really like to give everybody an opportunity to speak. If anybody else would like to speak, please indicate through the chat. The first speaker, the first discussant is Mr. Pavel Kotitscher, the Deputy Chairman of the Management Board of Zerde National Info Communication Holding from Kazakhstan, connecting all the way from Nur-Sultan. Mr. Pavel, please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Dear Fabrizio, dear distinguished panelists, it's my great honor to speak in this discussion. I would like to use the opportunity to share how Kazakhstan will contribute to implementation of roadmap objectives in achieving universal connectivity. In the beginning of this year, Kazakhstan has joined GIGA by signing the letter of intent with UNICEF and ITU on providing local schools with the internet. I would like to highlight that Kazakhstan will take the role of the regional lead in implementing and promoting GIGA in Central Asia. As the Minister of the Digital Development of Kazakhstan, Askar Jumagaliyev, has highlighted yesterday, Kazakhstan is working on the implementation of the state program Digital Kazakhstan, and GIGA will support this program in increasing access to the broadband coverage and increasing digital literacy. The government of Kazakhstan has already launched joint activities with the UNICEF and ITU on implementing GIGA. We have already mapped schools' connectivity. Currently, we are working on assessing connectivity needs across the country and building financing model to provide affordable internet to disconnected schools. The next steps in our cooperation will be empowering young people with the digital public goods, which is highlighted as an important action in a roadmap for digital cooperation. Digital public goods are essential to unlocking full potential of the digital technologies and data to attain the sustainable development goal. The leading role of taking the leading role of the coordinate GIGA activities in Central Asia, Kazakhstan will drive partnership and promote multi-stakeholder approach in order to create inclusive and equitable quality education for all. Dear experts and colleagues, GIGA initiatives have the great potential to strengthen the digital cooperation by keeping the world connected, especially in the face of today's challenges post-pandemic. COVID-19 outbreak has demonstrated that connectivity is an essential prerequisite for providing universal access to the digital services and digital public goods. I hope that more countries will join GIGA initiatives in order to accelerate achieving of sustainable development goals and providing universal connectivity. Thank you for the attention, and thank you. Have a good conversation ahead.
Our next speaker is Ms. Nena Noakama, Chief Web Advocate for the Web Foundation. I think Nena is well known to all of us, given her prolific internet and Twitter messages. And in fact, we have been very, very honored to have Nena as a close partner of our office and the Web Foundation as well, to be really one of our key supporters in putting forward the roadmap. Nena, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I think that's 1 minute of my speech. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends online, and friends who will come online because of the work we've all done. Good day. My name is Nena. I come from the internet, and I would like to use my 2 minutes to speak about meaningful connectivity. Now that everyone is convinced that universal connectivity is critical, our next challenge is to make it real. Meaningful connectivity is when we can use the internet every day using an appropriate device with enough data and fast connection. That's how we are all here today. I see in the roadmap itself that the first action point is to support efforts to establish a baseline of digital connectivity that individuals need to access the online space. That's what Fabrizio had told us at the beginning. So I'm happy that meaningful connection is the destination of the roadmap. But what does it mean in concrete terms? what is the minimum threshold? There are 4 things. One is regular internet use. That means every day, daily use. The second is an appropriate device, basically a smartphone. The next is enough data, which means unlimited broadband connection either at home, at work, or in school. And the fast connection, minimum 4G mobile connectivity. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, yes, we will connect the 3.6 billion that do not have internet access. Yes, we will connect women and girls, non-urban populations, marginalized groups. Yes, we will build skills, digital goods, and respect human rights. We will do all of that. But I'm here to make sure that my generation, this digital cooperation generation, will be the one to deliver universal, meaningful connectivity so that everyone, everywhere, can connect every day using an appropriate device with enough data and a fast connection. My name is Nena, and I'm happy to be part of the digital cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nena. Our next speaker is from the Etherium Foundation, and it will be Ms. Aya Miyaguchi.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. At the Etherium Foundation, we work to support the development and research of the open source decentralized Ethereum blockchain and education around it. We are honored to support the United Nations roadmap to digital cooperation. Among other things, blockchain can create a trust network to provide better security, transparency, and accountability. Applications built on top of Ethereum can provide decentralized solutions without a single point of failure. Now, different solutions are being established in various fields, including finance, governance, and education. We are especially excited to hear about and support the GIGA project working with the UNICEF innovation team. The GIGA project, just as introduced by the executive director of UNICEF, connects schools to help children who previously had no access or poor access to the internet. The blockchain technology and the community that we are part of also has an opportunity to help. For example, as GIGA connects schools to the internet with red dots turning into green dots on the GIGA map, you can share the key information such as real-time connectivity status, daily internet speed, and the payments among all stakeholders involved. The information is tamper-proof and can be monitored in a decentralized manner. A smart contract can also manage payments between schools, governments, and service providers automatically, so you know the data is authentic. These are just some examples of what blockchain can do. We also believe in the power of open source systems and hope that future work through this initiative will be open source so that the knowledge gained through these efforts are shareable. The Etherium Foundation is actively working with the UNICEF innovation team to identify and explore more blockchain tools through UNICEF Innovation's Crypto Fund and the GIGA project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aya. Our next discussant will be Mr. Christoph Steck, the Director of Public Policy on the Internet from Telefonica.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for giving us a chance to be able here to present our views as well. For the ones who are not familiar with Telefonica, we operate across 12 countries in Europe and Latin America. We serve around 350 million customers with connectivity and broadband networks. So for us, of course, the issue of connectivity to everyone is very close to our heart. I think we have seen that the COVID crisis has shown that digital communication infrastructures are really the lifelines of our societies and economies today. And I think it's also fair to say that we have maybe digitalized more in the last 10 weeks than the 10 years before. So we're in a good way here. So it's good to see that this is a key objective for policymakers and that the Secretary General has put that on the roadmap. And we very much support that. The big question, of course, is how can we achieve that we get everyone connected? I think that Fabrizio has done already a very good introduction showing that there's not one size fits all and not one big golden bullet. But first of all, we believe that more investments need to happen. And to do that, we need to basically learn from the countries who have attracted more investment. And I will just give you two very quick examples. One is Spain. Spain has achieved a so-called fiber miracle, as it's called. It has built over very few years the biggest fiber network in Europe and the #3 in the OECD world. And it has done so basically by doing the right policies and doing the right regulation. It has built basically now connectivity to 2/3 of households by fiber networks, and it's on a very good way to do that, to get universal fiber connectivity in few years. But there are also other examples. Peru, for example, an emerging economy. We have partnered there with not the usual suspects, but with, for example, Facebook, also with development banks like BID and CAF, and we have basically built a company called IPT, which is Internet para Todos in Spanish, which is a mobile infrastructure operator that focuses on providing connectivity in rural areas. In rural areas, that's a real challenge because the cost of deployment of networks are higher, while the demand is usually lower due to the sparse population. So basically, the idea of IPT is to drive innovation in various regards, bringing innovation to the operational model, to the technology used, for example. We're using something called Open RAN technologies, which are cheaper and secure, more secure than current technologies. We also try to bundle all the available demand in one network, in one infrastructure to make it more economically feasible. Of course, this infrastructure is then open up to everyone who wants to join in the efforts. So the result is spectacular. We have brought connectivity in only a year to more than 1.5 million Peruvians, connecting more than 6,000 smaller communities by over 1,000 new 3G and 4G sites. I mean, that's amazing for a year, and it can show it shows the results when we join forces. Because all of these developments in Spain and Peru has been done or made available by the right regulatory frameworks. Basically, the right policies have made possible investment by the private sector in frameworks. And I think that's what we need to focus more on. And I would like to see also now the roadmap going further in implementation to focus on. It's very important to get these policies right and to attract investment. There are many countries that still use outdated ideas. I will just show you two examples. One is we still use very costly auctioning of spectrum. Yes.
If I can ask you to just try and round up in a couple more sentences, I'm so sorry.
Okay, I will just, sorry for that.
Thank
yes,
you so much.
around that.
No problem.
So we have to look at spectrum policies, for example. We have to look at taxing of telecom services, which are still taxed as luxury goods in many countries. And we have to really focus commonly on that. This morning, our chairman has said that we need a new digital deal between the private sector and the public sector to really kind of build a human-centric, sustainable and digital future. And I think that the investments in new technology and in new broadband networks is key for here. And we're here to help with that. Thank you very much, and sorry for running a little bit over time.
No problem. Thank you, Christoph. It's just that we're trying to keep to time. There are many, many speakers, but thank you so much for that intervention. Our next discussant is Mr. Mike Lubin, the Vice President of Corporate Development from Viasat. Mike, please.
Thank you. Undersecretary General Hochschild, Excellencies, Honorable Delegates, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. In October 2018, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences held a conference in the Vatican on whether connectivity was indeed a human right. The following year, I led a panel at the UN opening on this very topic. At both, we discussed the demand for affordable, meaningful, and safe connectivity, advances in technology, ethical and dark considerations, whether connectivity is in fact a human right, and whether there might be a need for a World Connectivity Organization, a suggestion by my friend and colleague, Nicholas Negroponte. Some 2 years and one pandemic later, we cannot envision life without the internet, so connectivity has become a de facto human right. Although there are several reasons nearly 1/2 the planet remains unconnected, affordability and implementing sustainable models figure prominently. For the first time in history, and my 43 years in high technology, a new generation of satellites will be able to address in a sustainable way the ITU guideline that a transformational amount of broadband connectivity costs no more than 2% of earnings, and this be done anywhere, no matter how remote, rural, or urban. Each such satellite could deliver this kind of connectivity to up to 150 million people each. And such satellite networks can be designed with higher degrees of safety and security than their terrestrial counterparts. So we can put hundreds of millions of the unconnected online considerably before 2030 and for a fraction of some of the required investment mentioned by others. To provide a timely example in telehealth, a high-resolution video consultation with a healthcare professional, including all vital signs and diagnostic results that one would get in a doctor's office, will have bandwidth costs of less than 50 cents. And this can be done globally. As Undersecretary General Hochschild observed yesterday, the technology is no longer the issue. It can achieve affordability and scale. The one caveat is that 2% of earnings and financial sustainability may not be compatible for a subset of the unconnected, specifically those in extreme poverty, those who earn less than $1.90 per day, some 700 million of 3.5 billion unconnected. UN can and should act as a catalyst to bring together public and private entities to invest in connecting the world's unconnected profitably, as the roadmap suggests. But what about those living in extreme poverty where profitability or sustainability may not be possible? Let's not forget that SDG 1 is to eradicate poverty, and here connectivity can help. I would suggest that the roadmap consider the development of a world connectivity organization with laser focus on connecting those in extreme poverty and raising them out of poverty. So it is no longer a question of how, it is a question of who. But if not us around this virtual table, not the UN, then really who? Thank you for this opportunity. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that intervention. I like that question, if not us, then who? Very quickly now, our last speaker will be Dr. Catherine Getal, the ICT Authority of Kenya. And if Dr. Getal, if we could ask you to keep this very short because we're running a little bit over time and the next roundtable is actually to start. Dr. Getal from Kenya, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, colleagues, and people around the world. Here in Kenya, it's evening, so good evening. I'll keep mine very brief. I believe there's one issue we need to add, and that is the issue of energy. In Kenya, we had equipped 22,000 primary schools with equipment, but we had not connected them. And when COVID came, all those 8 million children had to go home. Now they no longer have access to the devices that we had provided at high cost, financed by the government of Kenya. So a few of them have been able to do their online classes. However, the issue of stable power becomes a real issue because when the power goes off, the connectivity goes off, and the devices after some time go off. So I hope that this is one of the issues that will be looked at as we look at these other issues around connectivity. It's the issue of clean and available and cost-effective power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Getal. And we now turn back to Undersecretary Hochschild, who will start the next discussion on digital public goods. Undersecretary General, please.
No, thank you. And thank you to all the discussants for those inspiring interventions. We're now talking about digital public goods. And of course, what's important is connectivity, but what we're connecting to and how much we can benefit from the internet is the second most critical issue. Because to the extent that the internet really represents just a massive marketplace, of course that has certain benefits, but the idea is to maximize other benefits: digital public goods, open source software, open data, open artificial intelligence, open standards and open content. And we've been very privileged to work with some of those who were really there at the creation of the internet and led its creation. Yesterday we heard from Tim Berners-Lee. We've been working throughout this process very closely with Vint Cerf, who was also on the high-level panel. And it's very striking the reality of the internet today compared to their original vision of a tool that would share knowledge equally throughout humanity. And if we look at the internet today, the degree to which that happens, it's certainly an important component, but it's not being maximized. And the report, therefore, has a series of recommendations about how we can re-win the internet as a public good for all humanity. And I have to say, you know, in the UN, as members of the Secretariat, we're not really meant to single out member states, but Norway, and together with UNICEF, as we've heard, have really been an extraordinary champion of digital public goods. And we're very privileged today to have the Minister for International Development of Norway, Mr. Dag Inge Ulstein. And I would like to hand over to Mr. Ulstein as the first intervener on this topic. And then we'll also be able to hear from the Minister of Education and Chief Innovation Officer of Sierra Leone, a country that has been pioneering in this area as well. But first, Mr. Ulstein, over to you.
Thank you so much, the Secretary General, ministers, co-champions, partners, friends. And first of all, thank you for all this very interesting and important insights that you've given us also through the last discussion. As we all very much are aware of, we are faced with an unexpected and unprecedented situation. A reality that does not seem real, but is all too real. I have to say that. Just as we were about to step up our endeavor to eradicate extreme poverty, by the end of this decade, the virus upended our lives. Just as the UN, Sierra Leone, Norway, and others had launched digitalization and digital public goods as powerful weapons in the race toward 2030, the pandemic hit us. And we have to say it has made the job even more difficult, and at the same time, digitalization even more important. I would therefore like to thank the Secretary General for introducing the roadmap for digital cooperation and for the invitation to speak at this important event. The Norwegian government will stay on the course we presented in a white paper before Christmas. We will work to make digitalization a key instrument for ensuring health and education for all, for creating jobs, for boosting agriculture, for securing access to renewable energy, and for combating modern slavery. The pandemic has made us use digital tools far more than before. But the poor people in the world do not have the same opportunity to meet without meetings or to run their societies from home. Billions are still lacking access to the internet. It is often the same people who are also deprived of clean water, reading lamps, and food on the table. They risk being left even further behind now. So we must also take into account that women are often less connected than men, and the same goes for people in conflict zones. Human rights must be a high priority, especially since political repression and gender-based violence are worsening because of the pandemic. Digitalization has led to greater prosperity, but also to increased inequality. I still believe in its potential to turn poverty into prosperity for everyone. And it can be done without reinventing the wheel every time. In Nepal, I spoke with farmers who had increased their income by 2,000% by using an app that gave them access to weather forecasts and to potential buyers. This is just one example. We have many of them. Norway will focus our efforts on 4 barriers to digitalization. First, on access, regulation, digital competence, and exclusion. In particular, Norway will actively support the implementation of Recommendation 1B from the high-level panel, establishing an alliance and creating a platform for sharing digital public goods. Together with Sierra Leone, UNICEF, UN Global Pulse, and the Indian think tank iSpirit, we have already made significant progress. As you know, an interim secretariat and an early platform prototype are now operational. I am very pleased to note the emphasis on digital public goods and on the alliance efforts in the Secretary General's roadmap. We have to act fast and use a long-term approach. We are working with stakeholders on digital public goods in areas such as health, education, climate change, adaptation, and financial inclusion. We will also support poor countries in the use of digital public goods in their response to the pandemic and in their long-term approach to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me give you just a few examples of what this means in practice. The Health Information System program is managed by the University of Oslo and hosts an open source platform which is currently being used in more than 100 countries with a global footprint of 2.3 billion people. Since we released for COVID-19 surveillance in March, the data packages have been put into use by more than 20 countries in Africa and Asia. In order to mitigate the education crisis that has resulted from the virus, we are also supporting countries in rapid adaptation and deployment of digital public goods in early grade reading. So the coronavirus, powerful as it may be, will not have the power to change our commitment to combating climate change and fighting poverty. The virus will not alter our commitment to international cooperation, nor our belief that the road to a world free of poverty is paved with good health, education, job creation, access to renewable energy and clean water, and digitalization. But now I'm eager to hear from our co-champions and partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. And let me hand over the floor to the next distinguished minister, the Minister of Education and Chief Innovation Officer of Sierra Leone, Excellency Mr. Singh.
Thank you very much, Chair and Your Excellencies. This is wonderful for us because I think in a way, people in the world might think this is hypothetical and this is about the future. While it is about the future, it is about the now. And I want to start my presentation by thanking especially Norway for being co-champions and for hosting at the NORAD conference in 2019 and our continued support. So thank you very much for that partnership, and we look forward to working with you and being champions together for these digital public goods with UNICEF and several other entities. I do want to mention that the work that Sierra Leone is doing is within the broader framework of what we call the National Innovation and Digital Strategy. The National Innovation and Digital Strategy launched by the and it's a government-wide solution policy that also links with the National Digitization Roadmap that the Ministry of Information is developing. But our principles and philosophy are digitization for all, identity, economy, and governance. And those principles are three. One is mobile first. The other one is country as a lab, country as AI lab, where we use artificial intelligence and applied data science for evidence-based policy making and citizen-centered design. And then hybrid technology systems. And again, one may want that to be like, why is Sierra Leone talking about these things and it's abstract, and it's not. And I'll give a couple examples of how our partnership with UNICEF and our partnership with UNDP, with their accelerator, and several other countries and institutions are having impact on people's life, particularly now. One example is our team at the SDI, Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation, had built these USSD and SMS apps. There are many countless examples of apps built by other countries that rely on heavy data. But we know that our mobile data connectivity, or just connectivity in general, is about 25%, whereas the mobile penetration is high 80%. And so we know that for our citizens to be able to use systems, it has to be mobile first, and that means we have to build open source solutions that are SMS and USSD based. And 2 months after we built those solutions, which are now available for partner countries in WHO, we are having conversations with WHO to use. We've had about 3 million interactions and over 200,000 users of that system. Henrietta spoke about Open G2P, which is a solution that with UNICEF innovate and as part of the DPGs that are being developed and DSTI, IDT Labs, which is a local startup company, had used and implemented a solution from when we had Ebola. And now they've put together that solution and are currently engaging on how we can, as governments, use it to, one, identify vulnerable groups to whom we're giving incentives to, how to verify them, how to pay those people using mobile money, and how to also facilitate redress systems. Another example I'll give is something that with GRI3, World Population Statistics Sierra Leone, we in Sierra Leone worked with MAXA to provide satellite imagery, World Pop, and we now have a gridded population estimate at about 100-meter resolution. And we use this for our own planning and COVID response. Now, the collaboration we have with UNICEF is focused on multiple layers. One, on school connectivity and GIGA, and we're proud to support GIGA and want to be fully involved, because this underscores some of our activities already happening by government, across government, the Ministry of Information and SALCAP, where we already have connected about 80 schools, and we're expanding that to 60 by August. And our goal by government's own measure is to connect about 500 schools. And we hope now that within GIGA, we can connect all of our schools, all of our 11,168 schools. We can connect them, and every child, every young person can have access to learning. Same with UNDP. The UNDP Accelerator is something that we're fully behind, and as partners within DSTI locally, and we're hoping to expand on digital skills and entrepreneurship. I want to end by highlighting the impact of DHIS2 that my colleague mentioned. Now, I and DSTI lead on the ICT response for COVID. The reason why Sierra Leone's response is data-driven and evidence-driven is primarily because we have a platform that is open source and that's available, like the DHIS2, where all our labs data, our surveillance data can be in one place, and so when we then work with other partners like Dimagi and Living Goods to build apps like for our quarantine facilities that are mobile friendly, we can link back to that data system. So one of the things that I want us to leave with is, while it may seem that the roadmap for digital cooperation launched by the UN is for the future, it is, and it is already applicable, and the impacts of those are now. And thus, we have to strengthen the institutions and the partnerships and the infrastructure that allow for there to be these open source algorithms, these open source tools, these open source platforms, such that we can share data freely, such that we can share data securely, and such that we can collaborate and have goals focused on, in my case, as Minister of Education, improving learning outcomes. But also as a government, that we can move our people. And in Sierra Leone, our focus is human capital development. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. We're very impressed and very proud that we're collaborating with all you're doing that. I'd now like to hand the floor over to our last senior intervener on this topic before we go to discussants. That's Robert Kirkpatrick, who leads UN data center that has helped many governments, many UN entities around the world. Robert Kirkpatrick. Robert, over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much. So this is Robert Kirkpatrick. I'd like Excellencies, distinguished participants, co-champions, and key stakeholders that have all contributed to the Secretary General's roadmap on digital cooperation. I congratulate you all on the launch of this important milestone in achieving better connectivity, respect, and protection of our rights in a digital world. The COVID-19 pandemic has become a global emergency that places progress toward achieving the sustainable goals at risk. It has shown the power of misinformation, hate speech, and discrimination. Poor and vulnerable communities are particularly imperiled by its health, social, and economic ramifications. Yet the pandemic is also accelerating global efforts to leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships around the use of data and technologies for public good. This roadmap comes at a very important and challenging time and carries messages that we all hope to take further action on to ensure progress on the SDGs is not driven in reverse, and that traditional data, new sources of data, and new technologies such as artificial intelligence and blockchain are used to benefit humanity and preserve human rights. Data and artificial intelligence are among the critical tools that can not only fill gaps in response to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis and its impacts on our society, but more broadly, they offer an opportunity to help close gaps in achieving the SDGs. At Global Pulse, we have been working from inside the Office of the Secretary General to responsibly leverage data innovation for development, humanitarian action, and peace for more than a decade now. In recent years, we have joined expert stakeholders and the high-level panel in developing this roadmap, especially on both high-level panel recommendation 1B on digital public goods and recommendation 3 on digital human rights and artificial intelligence. These challenging times that we face today with COVID-19 indeed highlight the need for faster, a more privacy-respecting access to quality data and trustworthy artificial intelligence models. Creation of digital public goods, open data, open standards, open source software, and open AI models is crucial in ensuring transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness as part of our digital journey. Digital public goods are a tool that can not only reduce the digital divide, encourage innovation and economic growth, but also aid faster recovery from the ongoing crisis. However, access to and development of digital public goods cannot happen without first ensuring availability of quality data and governance frameworks that enable access to it in a human rights respecting way. Aware of the above and of the importance of digital inclusion as well in closing the digital gap, Global Pulse has been working with the government of Uganda, a least developed country, and the government of Ghana to develop ethical AI strategies. Today, we are living in a world in which there is an increasing amount of data being produced, much of which, it turns out, has tremendous untapped potential to accelerate progress toward the SDGs. This data, in many cases, proprietary data, collected and owned by private sector, is often locked up due to strict regulatory requirements, or the lack of regulatory requirement, the lack of regulations, lack of capacity, or absence of scaled approaches to sharing data. Such data, if governed by proper frameworks and protocols, could not only accelerate the creation of digital public goods, but could also ensure their quality and trustworthiness. The Global Data Access Framework is one of the examples of a multi-stakeholder initiative that aims to unlock the untapped potential of the world's data by establishing a global distributed architecture to enable discovery, exchange, and governance of data. The Access Framework aims to substantially contribute to innovative data governance models, not only by advancing robust requirements for privacy protection for all data sharing, but also by incorporating novel technical solutions to better protect data. As the Secretary General noted in his remarks yesterday, we cannot reap the full benefits of the digital age without mobilizing global cooperation to close digital gaps and reduce potential harms. As we now enter the decade of action to achieve the SDGs, we need to pay particular attention to opportunities to apply prediction for prevention. By this, I mean combining new sources of digital data and artificial intelligence or predictive analytics to support crisis prevention. Moreover, we need to balance the risks of misuse of data and misuse, and ensure that when technologies can be used and data can be used safely and responsibly, they are used for the public good. We will continue with our partners from governments, the private sector, and civil society, the technology community, academia, and of course our roadmap for digital cooperation co-champions and stakeholders to ensure that data and new technologies are used safely for the public good. Thank you.
Robert, thank you so much for those inspiring words and for all your cooperation and help in putting the roadmap together. And I know we will work closely on the follow-up. Now let me hand back to Yu Ping for our discussants. Yu Ping, over to you.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary General. Our first discussant is Ms. Gabriela Alvarado, who's the Chief of the World Food Programme's IT Emergency Coordination Branch and the Chair of the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster. Gabriela, please.
Thanks, thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. So the World Food Programme leads the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster, also known as the ETC. It's a global network of organizations that work together to provide technology solutions in humanitarian emergencies. Essentially, we serve humanitarians, governments, and communities. We always strive to minimize that digital divide, the one that we see more and more, the one that we're seeing during this pandemic. Things have never been so critical as they are now because of the pandemic. All these variables that we've seen, they all hang on to communications technology. Battling misinformation, we've heard about it in the previous conversations. It's crucial in this pandemic. To battle this, you need services which enable the exchange of information on real and on perceived risk between both health organizations and the affected populations, so they can both make decisions among themselves. This involves mass communication campaigns where information is broadcasted, FM radios, community radios, SMS, mobile applications, chatbots. There's many ways that we can provide this type, what we can support. Our understanding is that for the affected population, they need to make these live decision-making tools. And for this, they need access to information, and they need to be able to voice their needs. Two-way communications where people can voice concerns and get their feedback. Common feedback mechanisms, chatbots. These are two ways where we're trying to see that it does make a big difference, and we need to find ways to continue to foster these, to promote digital inclusion. COVID-19 has really made us find, or catapulted us in finding different ways to shift on how we do things. It's accelerated the need to promote digital inclusion, to battle misinformation, to reduce the panic and the fear. What we saw in 2014 in the Ebola response, we're seeing it again. This has allowed the shifting of the operations where the ETC supports. In Mozambique in 2019, we had the unfortunate situation where two cyclones hit almost back to back. Through the support of our partners and the donors, we were able to rehabilitate 6 community radios, which we were able to reach almost 2 million users or listeners. Today, there's 2 radio stations in Mozambique. Radio Gorongosa and Radio Dondo are now disseminating information about COVID-19 to their communities in different forms, through advertising spots, radio debates, interviews, reports. They even have shows specifically produced for children. It is not just about any type of technology or the newest one, it's about the appropriate technology. And this is where we should be aiming to achieve. In Central African Republic, we're doing similar situation, supporting the Ministry of Health. We're working chatbots to enrich artificial intelligence for the misinformation. Basic questions is, where can I get myself tested? What are the government lockdowns? What is the closest medical center to me? Things that we take for granted that is not the same situation. These are the important factors that we need to continue to make sure that we continue to save lives and we continue to have or provide education means to those most affected. The ETC welcomes the Secretary General's roadmap, particularly in that it calls for special attention to connectivity in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Our next speaker is Kate Wilson, who is the CEO of the Digital Impact Alliance. Kate, please.
Hi, I'm Kate Wilson, CEO of DIAL, housed at the UN Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to join this important discussion and celebrate the progress made over the last year. We deeply appreciate the leadership of the UN and the Secretary General in this critical area, as well as the efforts and commitment of all the key constituents and stakeholders. There's no doubt we are living through extraordinary times. Overlapping crises imperil progress towards the SDGs and continue to disproportionately affect the most vulnerable. But we also see the global community cooperating in new ways to take swift action. And it may indeed signal, as the Minister from Norway suggests, a new era for digital cooperation and our ability to achieve the SDGs using digital transformation. As the Secretary General said, digital technologies are essential tools in defeating the COVID-19 pandemic and achieving the 2030 agenda. The pandemic response simultaneously showcases all the rewards and all the risks of digital. We are reckoning with deep inequity in our societies, and digital technologies embody those biases. We can and we must do better. DIAL is proud to be the stewards of the Principles for Digital Development, living guidelines that help its over 220 endorsers towards more ethical and more community-led digital practices globally. Digital transformation at country level is critical to deliver services and better understand and respond to the challenges we face. We know from the work of countries like Estonia, South Korea, and Singapore that digital transformation can expand access to basic services. We must accelerate our progress and work smarter. We must commit to working across sectors and the whole of society to align on policy, financing, and good practices that we can share and document. DIAL's mission is to help the digital ecosystem to come together to realize this digital transformation agenda. Working together is a necessity if we are to achieve the SDGs. We heartily welcome the emphasis placed on this by the Secretary General and all those involved in the follow-up to the high-level panel. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and we appreciate this opportunity to offer remarks.
Thank you so much, Kate, especially for sticking to the 2 minutes. Our next speaker is now David Hughes from the Food and Agricultural Organization. David, if I could give you the floor, please.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks for the leadership from Fabrizio and all the previous participants. So I wanted to give a concrete example of how we can, in Fabrizio's words, re-win the internet. And I wanted to talk about the locust upsurge, which is now from Kenya to India. This is threatening over 20 million people across the region. And it overlapped with the COVID outbreak, which severely restricted the plans. So during the last 100 days, Plants Village at Penn State, in collaboration with UNFAO, have been able to launch an AI-first platform, which was integrating 4 smallholder farmers and pastoralists which were affected, monitoring tools, which is truly an example of the Internet of Things. We were able to integrate satellites from NASA, NOAA, FAO data, community involvement for nomadic pastoralists in Turkana, for example, in Kenya, where 88% of them are below the poverty line. We were able to integrate this information using advanced machine learning to predict the likely occurrence of locusts and to be able to then send airplanes to spray those. Based upon this integration of open source technology, the UN has recognized that we're able to save food, 750,000 tons of maize, which is about the food for about 5 million people for a year. And so we all achieved this during the times of COVID, which provided those constraints. We were also able to work with partners like Mercy Corps to have a TV program reaching 6 million people every week on information, as well as being able to then launch this in Ethiopia as well in the coming weeks. So this really does show a tight integration. We're also getting Safaricom to potentially free rate the tool, because digital public goods like NASA satellites, like NOAA interventions are not public if you have to pay for the airtime. So this really does show a good integration, and we're very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Back to USG Fabrizio, who will be kicking off our next roundtable, which is that of digital inclusion. USG, please.
Thank you. And I'd like to apologize that we're running a bit over time. So digital inclusion really is absolutely key. We need, if we want to achieve global connectivity, we need to focus very specifically on exactly who is excluded. And of course, exclusion in the analog world is often mirrored in the digital world and often magnified and exacerbated. So first we need to understand and have reliable metrics, and this is the first set of recommendations of the report around exactly who is being left out, and that will vary from country to country, region to region. Second, the report recommends putting together a coalition, which also came together as we were working on the roadmap, but formalizing a coalition to specifically better address the inclusion deficit when it comes to connectivity. And third, we need policies that will directly, on a targeted basis, direct investments towards ensuring connectivity of the least connected and most excluded. So those are the basic line of the recommendations in the roadmap. We've been very lucky that one of our champions has been Mexico. Mexico has also been a leader in New York on ensuring new technologies are better used to advance the sustainable development goals. So we'll have a statement now from the Foreign Minister of Mexico, His Excellency Marcelo Ebrard, and we're also very lucky to have on the line the distinguished representative here in New York of Mexico, Ambassador Juan Ramon de la Fuente. But first, we will hear from the Foreign Minister, and then we will also have another great champion of inclusion in the UN, the Executive Director of UN Women, my dear and much admired colleague Fumzile. But first, we will hear from the Foreign Minister of Mexico.
Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure for Mexico to participate in this multilateral effort of the United Nations to address topics related for technologies, because we are convinced that along with science and innovation, it's an essential tool that can make a real difference to foster sustainable development, reduce inequalities, and have more inclusive societies. As you know, Mexico presented to General Assembly the topic of exponential technological change a few years ago. We believe it's extraordinarily relevant and needs to be analyzed and assessed by United Nations. We were not wrong. On the contrary, this issue has grown even more relevant as the life of billions of persons in the world, their work, knowledge, health, and communication rely today completely on technology and science. This is why I'm very pleased to participate in the launching of the United Nations Secretary-General Roadmap on Digital Cooperation. Mexico championed recommendations 1C and 1D on digital inclusion. Together with United Nations Women, we steered the work on almost 30 stakeholders, whose work I would like to commend. The COVID-19 pandemic is moving us to a world more digital than ever. However, it has also reminded us the fact that only half of the world population have access to internet, leaving 3.6 billion of people out of these opportunities. As the Secretary-General Roadmap points out, digital divides reflect and amplify existing social, cultural, and economic inequalities. Within our group, we identified that the special attention needs to be given to women and girls, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, older persons, persons with disabilities, rural population, and indigenous people. Mexico will continue working in the United Nations on this issue. Now, along with Finland and Singapore, we co-chair the Group of Friends and Digital Technologies. And we plan to continue building consensus around this very important issue. Our emphasis will continue to be the access of the most vulnerable to the tools of the present and the future. In the framework of the fight against COVID-19, and in the decade of action for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. That's why it's an honor for us to participate in this roadmap launch.
Well, we're deeply grateful for the commitment and leadership of bringing this theme to the attention of member states and advancing the UN in this critical area that Mexico spearheads. I now have the honor to pass the floor to my very distinguished colleague, the Executive Director of UN Women, Phumzile.
Partners, can you hear me?
Now, yes. I
Not
hear
yet?
you well, Phumzile. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me start again. I am pleased to be with you today for this launch, which is a key milestone. We are thrilled to see so many partners coming together, and we're honored to co-facilitate this discussion on digital inclusion with Mexico. We're also particularly pleased because Mexico will hold a celebration that will mark Beijing 25. In that celebration, under the theme Generation Equality, the issue of innovation, technology, women and girls will be one of the topics we will focus on. For this work of the Secretary General, we were determined to tackle the social, cultural, and economic inequalities that cause the digital divide. In the age of COVID, the challenges that we face have been made even clearer and starker. But even before COVID, the digital divide was widening and getting worse. In COVID-19 crisis, it simply showed us even more how acutely digital tools are a lifeline for millions of people who have no access. And therefore, our consideration for inclusion has to address that. For example, we know that online learning programs can ensure that girls do not drop out of education, but instead they are better equipped for highly digitized future. Girls' education is critical. It is one of the major achievements of the last 25 years. The idea of girls' education being eroded will mean that we have another lost generation. And therefore, technology is but one of the few large-scale game changers that can help us address this issue. Those excluded from the digital world are most at risk of being left behind, unable to work and learn remotely or access vital social services or communicate with loved ones. This roadmap builds on the need to intensify collaboration amongst public and private sector so that we can address these challenges. The roadmap shows us that to reduce the digital divide drastically in the next couple of years, we have to rely on all stakeholders to make sure that we have access and affordability, safety and privacy, digital skills, and open source content, amongst others. We have to find efficient ways of measuring digital inclusion and literacy that can apply to all countries and guide policy efforts. And with that, we will need sex disaggregated data. We need to establish strong multi-stakeholder partnership, such as the one that we're envisaging in marking Beijing 25, which will be co-hosted by Mexico and France. And we will have Finland and Tunisia leading this effort, UNICEF and ITU amongst the UN agencies, and we are mobilizing and asking all of you in this room to be part of this effort, especially those of you also who are from private sector and those who are from foundation. The SG identified technology as one of the 5 areas that can help gender inequality and transform our world if we pull together. But for that, women must play an equal role in designing digital technologies. Lack of gender diversity will not expand gender equality. Lack of racial inclusion will not expand inclusion and address the racial divide. Instead, it will limit the scope and the impact of this important technology. And I know not under our watch. We can pull together to close this inclusion gap. I look forward to hearing all of the discussions that we shared today, and inclusion is central for the future we all want and envisage in the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phumzile, for those words and your leadership in this area. I'd now like to hand the floor over to Yuping for the discussants on this critical topic.
Thank you, USG. Our first discussant is going to be Ms. Amanda Keaton, who is General Counsel at Wikimedia. Amanda, please.
Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, dear representatives and fellow colleagues, thank you for having me here today. Wikimedia Foundation is an international nonprofit organization that supports Wikipedia, the largest collection of free and open knowledge in human history. I'm very excited to join this event. The work that is happening around inclusivity and representation feels especially relevant in this moment. For instance, Black Lives Matter has become a rallying call for action in the US and around the world. We're finally hearing news stories about people of color that we've never heard before. These stories are part of the world's history, and yet they've been omitted from the record until now. Around the world, we know that there are major gaps in what has been recorded and is documented on the internet. The voices of women from emerging regions, of indigenous communities, have been left out of history. Even now, content across our digital platforms reflects only a small piece of the world. This must change. Digital platforms provide a unique opportunity to amplify these important perspectives. We must encourage participation from new voices and empower underrepresented groups to share their stories. We must build content that is more representative of the entire world. Together, we can and we must fill in historic gaps. Take our platform, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a digital public good because of its open content and open licensing, which has made it one of the most ubiquitous sources of information online. Open digital platforms like Wikipedia are becoming a key resource for training new artificial intelligence systems. Yet when there are blind spots online, the AI tools we build are embedded with the same bias. If we don't take action now, we'll perpetuate a pattern of exclusion in the technology that we rely on to drive us forward. It is our responsibility as leaders, elected representatives, policymakers, and advocates to adopt policies that actively improve inclusivity and equity across digital platforms. In order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the international community must intentionally create inclusive online spaces and a truly representative internet, one that better serves us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you especially also for keeping to the time limit. We now move to Mr. Carlos Grau, who is the CEO of the Mobile World Capital.
Your Excellencies, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your invitation and congratulations for the UN roadmap and these enriching discussions. At Mobile World Capital Barcelona, our aim is to drive the mobile and digital transformation of our society in order to improve people's lives globally while promoting innovation and acknowledge to others the most pressing challenges of the digital era. We are a public private foundations of the Spanish government, the regional government of Catalonia and the city of Barcelona, the GSMA, and other private partners and large telco carriers as Telefónica, Orange, and Vodafone. On digital inclusion, one of our global programs, Digital Future Society, has developed guiding framework report for policymakers to measure and monitor digital inclusion more effectively in collaboration with UN University. We have also published a second report that presents a global framework for digital cooperation with roadmap for public and private institutions. Our work, Mr. Chairman, is aligned with the recommendations of the panel and UN Secretary General. Our value add is our methodology, bringing together public and private institutions, which is a necessary step to achieve inclusive societies in line with the spirit of Goal 17 of the Agenda 2030. Excellencies, we need to connect the unconnected and educate the uneducated. Indeed, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we feel that has been accelerated a sense of digital emergency in a similar way of climate emergency, forcing humanity to change and to rely more on technology and digitalization. If we don't address the current digital emergency, consequences will be devastating for achieving inclusion, gender empowerment, and sustainable development. Of course, there is an urgency to invest in connectivity and devices, but on top of that, we need also to work together on digital literacy, digital competencies for our citizens, to be able to work from anywhere, to access public services, banking services, e-commerce, and for our children and students to exercise the fundamental right to study, leaving no one behind. Finally, I would like to invite the Special Advisor Fabrizio and all of you to join us in our Global Digital Future Society Summit in Barcelona at the end of the year to discuss the emergency challenges and global responses on data governance, digital divide, future of work of digital platforms, and how technology can help us to drive the challenge of climate change. We expect all our partners there, European Union, UN, World Economic Forum, Smart Africa, and other public and private partners to reach agreements and how we take urgent actions to have a more human-centric, ethic, and inclusive society where we leverage properly the opportunities of disruptive technologies and we anticipate and minimize risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for that stirring statement from giving us the perspective from the private sector. Our next speaker is Ms. Kelly Clements, who is the Deputy High Commissioner from the UN High Commission for Refugees. Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks to the co-chairs, to Mexico and to UN Women for really steering the dialogue on inclusion of women and marginalized populations in the roadmap that we're welcoming today. We are tremendously fortunate to see a community that has recognized the over 70 million forcibly displaced as a strong assessment in terms of these two groups, refugees and internally displaced in particular, that they are particularly affected by the digital divide. The special attention to people on the move, to people in emergency situations, in conflict settings, and so on, will be a strong focus, obviously, in implementation of this roadmap. The central role of digital technology and inclusion in humanitarian action is key, and it has been key for us in terms of delivery in the pandemic. And it increases access, of course, to the people that we're serving, increases dignity and opportunity to contribute, obviously, with host communities as well. We'll need investments in energy and connectivity and in devices. We'll need to pay attention to how we train, how we learn in terms of this technology. Second point, we support strongly the Secretary General's call for a coalition to promote digital inclusion. It's a fundamental principle of the Global Compact on Refugees, the right for refugees and their hosts to be part of a connected society, to collaborate, to partner, with, of course, appropriate protection for data. Broad partnerships have been addressed, obviously, at the national level. We've seen this, for example, in Uganda, where refugees were not often trusted to have a legal pathway in terms of digital inclusion and blocked access to education and jobs, working very strongly with a broad coalition of government, regulators, GSMA, MNOs. We've worked to identify the barriers and been able to see now Some say an increase of 50% in terms of inclusion in this key. Third key point is we support strongly strengthened data and analysis to promote inclusion. Incomplete data has really been an inhibiting factor in places like Bidi Bidi in northern Uganda or in Rwanda. There are important differences that we need to address, and we need those clear baselines. So thank you again for seeing a roadmap that includes metrics on data. We fully support and we look forward to implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I believe this is now the last of the discussions on digital inclusion. I will now turn it back to the USG. USG Fabrizio.
I'd like to thank our excellent discussions, in particular Kelly. I think Mexico has also been a champion of ensuring better connectivity for those on the move. And Kelly was right to remind us that connectivity can also be a vital means of protection for refugees and other people whose rights are not respected as they are on the move. Of course, what we've advocated around inclusion, what we've advocated for around global connectivity, what we've advocated for around digital public goods, won't be able to happen unless we also promote digital capacity building. And that's the next area where there's a set of recommendations in the report. It's clear there are multiple capacity building efforts already underway by the private sector, by member states, by regional organizations, by UN organizations. And the challenge is often that these are not adequately coordinated, and sometimes they're more supply than needs driven. And the recommendations in the high-level report look not so much at establishing a new mechanism, but more at how can we coordinate these efforts better, and how can we make it sure that they're more driven by objective needs assessment, because every situation will differ, every country, every region of every country will have a different set of capacity building needs, and how can we make sure that we both scale up efforts, coordinate them better, and make sure that they're more tailored to needs. And there are a series of suggestions in our report along those lines. ITU, of course, have been doing this for many years, and they were the champions of this particular set of recommendations together with the UN Development Programme. And we're very glad that ITU and UNDP will be strengthening their cooperation in this area. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers who will have to introduce this topic before we go to our discussants. And in particular, my dear friend and somebody I've worked with very closely on this throughout, Doreen Bogdan Martin, and then we'll have Robert Hobbs. So first, Doreen, who is a deputy head of ITU and the leader of their Telecommunication Development Bureau. Doreen, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Undersecretary General, distinguished colleagues, it's great to see the faces and names of so many friends. Of course, it's also a great pleasure to have the opportunity to join this important global dialogue on the roadmap for digital cooperation that I believe will be a critical pillar for progress in this final decade of action. ITU is proud to have contributed to this roadmap, in particular to this recommendation on digital capacity building, as well as the recommendation on global connectivity. This roadmap could not have come at a timelier juncture, and I wanted to borrow from the OECD SG statement yesterday. There has been no better moment to close the digital divide than now. This COVID pandemic has been a catalyst for connectivity, and it has, without question, made the case for change for digital cooperation. There can no longer be any doubt that dramatically accelerating progress on the SDGs also means dramatically accelerating progress to extend digital connectivity to the 3.6 billion that are still totally cut off from the internet. But it also means making concerted and concrete efforts to substantially improve connectivity to the hundreds of millions that we currently count as connected, because the digital reality on the ground for hundreds of millions is devices that are too expensive, bandwidth that's too slow, too costly, and connectivity that does not extend into their homes or their workplaces. Millions of these, what we would call digitally destitute, really lack the truly meaningful connectivity. We've heard many other panelists refer to this meaningful connectivity that would then tangibly transform their lives. And of course, capacity building is a prerequisite to achieve this meaningful connectivity, to bridge the digital divide, and also to unleash the truly transformational power of technology. This is a key focus, as you mentioned, Fabrizio, of my work in my bureau and one of the founding goals of the ITU. As Brad Smith said yesterday in the PGA session, we see the digital divide not just in terms of technology, but in education and skilling. And it reminds us of the importance not only in spreading technology to the world as a whole, but spreading access to the skills that will be needed to put that technology to work for the people. That lack of digital skills is impeding adoption, and we must reinforce our efforts around skills development, particularly for the marginalized, including women and girls, the disempowered youth, displaced persons, and I would even add educators and parents. And to borrow a COVID analogy, we're hoping that a new focus on upskilling educators will help them to become super spreaders of digital literacy to their broader communities. The COVID crisis has pushed the dial on digital skills development, and I think we cannot overstate the urgency around this issue. We must focus on skills to create, to adopt, and also to lead. From our side, our work with our ITU Academy, our digital centers of excellence, our new digital transformation centers, and our future Center on Digital Innovation, as well as some of our targeted campaigns around girls and technology, on decent jobs for youth, and of course, our recently launched Digital Skills Assessment Guidebook. These tools tackle not just digital skill building, but also supporting digital capacity building for institutions. You've heard about our bold, transformational new GIGA partnership with UNICEF to connect all schools and children to information, opportunity, and choice. And it's these kinds of partnerships that will bring real and rapid progress. We've had the privilege to co-champion with UNDP this recommendation, and I want to thank everyone that contributed through our survey that we sent out to the group. We instigated a mapping of exercises on capacity building. The results highlighted the need to increase knowledge on digital matters, as well as assuring access to existing good practices, resources, and information. And our recommendations really highlight the need to be holistic, needs-driven, coherent, coordinated, and of course, noting that one size does not fit all. As we noted in the roadmap, we're pleased to be joining forces with UNDP to establish this joint facility for digital capacity building. The facility would bring our respective competencies together and serve as a platform for knowledge sharing and facilitate assistance delivery in areas such as digital readiness, policy and regulatory support, digital literacy, and digital skills building. It will also serve as a digital matchmaking hub and clearinghouse, connecting countries in need with capacity building offerings from donors. It would be open to all players, and we invite the partners on the dialogue today to complete the survey. Tell us what you're doing so we really get a comprehensive picture of global needs and priorities. The UNSG's roadmap comes at a time when we need to cooperate on digital development, and that need has never been so urgent. It is a leadership imperative. And we look forward to engaging with you proactively, with the UNSG's team, with you, Fabrizio, our sister agencies, and all the stakeholders in the digital ecosystem, not just to build back better, but to catch the wave, as Henrietta noted, and build back better with affordable, accessible, trusted, and meaningful broadband for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doreen, for those inspiring works and for your great work in this area. And we really hope we can help boost your efforts. I'd now like to hand the floor to Robert Opp, who's been a long-time close collaborator in this area, and who's now the Chief Digital Officer at the UN Development Programme. Rob, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Fabrizio, for this opportunity and for the support that you and your team have given on the whole roadmap process. Particularly appreciated that, and congratulations to you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you who are joining online. You know, I'm going to be a little bit repetitive because the main themes are really here with us. And, you know, in the 21st century, we've already seen that the convergence of new technologies was driving massive change, but COVID has really accelerated that. And across the 170 countries where UNDP is present, and that we're working to support governments using digital technologies, we've seen just how critical they are to be responding to COVID in areas like connecting their civil service to be able to stay working remotely and communicating credible information about the pandemic to people, countering misinformation, being able to offer government services online, online learning, telemedicine, and so on, and using data for better decision-making, payments for social benefits to systems. And at the same time, all of the challenges that were with us before are still with us and have been aggravated as well. So we see the issues around data privacy and protection, the misinformation issue I just mentioned, and we see the digital divide is a major problem. So particularly for marginalized populations, women, those who are most vulnerable, those who are being left behind are being more left behind, is a point that Fabrizio made in his initial remarks. So we know that some of the fundamental enablers need to be there. We've discussed a bunch of them already. So connectivity is, of course, a big enabler, but this capacity issue keeps coming up over and over again as a major issue around how we're going to be able to foster digital cooperation. And that's really where our part of the roadmap came in. And I want to thank ITU and Doreen in particular, as well as all of the roundtable members who were in this together with us, looking at this issue of how we build digital capacity building. So a few points that came up, Doreen already summarized some of them, but you know, we really found the expression from the roundtable that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for digital capacity building. And national circumstances, even subnational circumstances, need to be taken into account for particular populations and particular approaches to capacity building. And then our mapping exercise, the survey that we did, revealed that there's a lack of knowledge and awareness around the policy and regulatory environment, and a lack of coherent and harmonized approaches to capacity building. In some cases, a lack of investment and a lack of just gaps in where attention needs to be paid. Particularly, as I said before, in places like marginalized populations. We cannot afford to leave people behind and let that digital divide become even more prominent. So we know that it's everything that's going on, there's a lot going on. A lot of it is fragmented, a lot of it isn't keeping up with the pace and the scope of the demands. So we urgently need to better understand that demand. We need to identify the best models that are out there and look towards scaling them up. And we really need to support governments and other players in terms of digital readiness strategies, the policy environments. We're seeing some great and creative responses out there in the countries that we work with. In Ukraine, for example, offering online courses for its civil servants, and in Kazakhstan, training volunteers to help low literacy populations on how to use digital public services. Ecuador and Colombia providing support for SMEs. There's great stuff going on out there. We need to find what's working, what isn't, scale what's working. We can't do this alone. It's not the UN system with our government partners that can do it alone. We need the private sector, we need academia, we need the other sectors to come in. And to that end, as Doreen mentioned, we're looking forward to implementing the recommendations and the strategies that are in this roadmap around a matching kind of network, a multi-stakeholder network where that supply issue can be matched with demand, and also building up the joint facility between UNDP and ITU that Doreen talked about, something that can offer support in the areas of digital readiness, policy, and regulatory environment. So I'll leave it there. This is a critical issue. We have been extremely proud to be part of this whole process. And once again, Fabrizio, let me reiterate our support for the roadmap and our congratulations to you and team for making this a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you so much for spearheading UNDP's stepping up in this area. And I look forward to working more together in the future. Let me hand back now to Yu Ping for the commentary.
Thank you so much, USG. Our first discussant, and again, I ask for everybody's indulgence again to try and stick to 2 minutes, is Mr. Anders Aero, who is Director of the Division of Enterprises and Institutions at ITC. Mr. Anders Aero, please.
Excellencies, Under Secretary General, colleagues around the world. As we start out on the decade of action towards accomplishment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the COVID-19 pandemic presents Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
As we start out on the decade of action towards accomplishment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the COVID-19 pandemic presents a significant challenge, but has also shown the importance of digital. Never has the world been so connected, never has information and data been so crucial to sustain our businesses, education and government services. At the same time, we see how the digital transformation process is lagging behind in the least developed countries. There are many factors explaining this situation: lack of full broadband connectivity and limitations in hard and soft infrastructure, including digital skills. Behind every SDG, there is the potential contribution through digital solutions. ITC has been focusing on how we can leverage the digital space to support inclusive growth and drive the implementation of the SDGs. Effective digital footprints and e-commerce have become central to the survival of many SMEs during this crisis. There may be nearly 500 million internet users in Africa, but less than a quarter of those have ever engaged in e-commerce. Socioeconomic and cultural barriers reduce inclusivity among significant populations, including the rural poor, women, and the remote. But in addition to infrastructure and socioeconomic barriers, digital literacy can also limit the potential for e-commerce, sometimes even to a greater extent than connectivity. Hence, an even greater effort is needed to build capacities. At ITC, we are working with the base of the pyramid to incorporate digital into the way micro, small and medium-sized enterprises trade, with a focus on building digital skills in all our related projects. We recognize that impactful support can only come from a network of partners. Let me give the example of Senegal, where we last month, with the support of the Netherlands, prepared with the Ministry of Health, the National Agency for ITC Procurement, and the Industry Association Optic, and the private sector to identify and support young innovators coming up with responses to the pandemic during the Code Against COVID hackathon through the National DAN COVID platform. The Ministry of Health is now looking at scaling nationwide the winning proposals, confirming that impactful support can indeed come from a network of partners. We welcome the publication of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation and its implications for accelerating and scaling up our collective response, to which ITC is fully committed. Thank you.
Thank you so.
Yu Ping, you're on mute. Yu Ping, you're on mute.
Again, it's something I still have to work on. Thank you so much, USG. And thank you so much, Anders. Our next speaker is Mr. Gabanga Sasan, who is the Executive Director of Paradigm Institute. Mr. Sasan, please. Gabanga? I believe he was online shortly before. Are you there? We will try again with him later. He's on mute. I'm glad to see I'm not the only person with this difficulty. Gabanga? Perhaps let's move on to our next discussant, and then we can come back to Mr. Sasan. Shall we move on to our next discussant then? Our next discussant, if I could call on Mr. Pradeep S. Mehta, Secretary General of CUTS International. Mr. Mehta, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Good. Can you see me?
Please turn your camera on.
The video seems a little problematic, Mr. Mehta. Perhaps you can speak.
now.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Please
Fine,
go
anyway,
ahead.
I'd like to thank you very much and to wish all of you a very hearty namaste. Seems to be the best way to wish each other coming from India. Now, I've been asked to speak for 2 minutes in capacity building. We are a 37-year-old non-government organization working globally with several centers in Africa and Washington and Geneva, including in India. And we've had some very good experience of capacity building. And some speaker before me rightly said that there's no one size fits all. And my own experience with a lot of capacity building operations carried out by international organizations is that it has been a very top-down approach. To begin with, you need a proper needs assessment to be done of the audience that you wish to build capacity about. And particularly in the area of the digital economy, on which we've been working on for nearly about 5 years now, we find that regulators are just not clear about what is it that they have to regulate and what is it that they don't have to regulate. And unless we aim at optimal regulation as a part of the capacity building outcomes, we will end up into difficulty in a large number of countries. Predecessing speakers also spoke about various issues surrounding the digital economy, data privacy, data piracy, etc., etc. As I said, these are all sets of complex issues, and we have been carrying out capacity building in various areas for many years, particularly in the developing world of Asia and Africa. And we feel that we can do this work good, and we are happy with the offer made by the lady from the UNDP that they're looking for more partners, which we'd be happy to get in touch with her. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mehta. Our next speaker, and I'm trying him again, I hope he's back online this time, Mr. Sasan Gabenga from Paradigm Institute. Do we manage to have you this time around? Gabenga? And I hear some sounds. Mr. Gabenga? Mr. Sasan? All right, I think...
Could you move Mr. Sasan to the participants list, please? He's on the attendees list.
I think, given this, while we are sorting out the technical difficulties, there are always challenges with virtual meetings. Perhaps we'll go to our next discussant then, Mr. Torbjörn Fredriksson, Chief of the IT Policy Section in UNCTAD. Mr. Fredriksson, are you online?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, for allowing UNCTAD to make a brief intervention. The high pace of digital transformation, coupled with the huge digital divides, calls for greatly enhanced capacity building efforts in order to achieve more inclusive outcomes. The COVID-19 pandemic has further accentuated this need. UNCTAD welcomes the roadmap's emphasis on making digital capacity building more demand-driven, strengthening coherence and coordination, to develop the idea of digital help desks, and to involve UN country teams in this context. In terms of implementation of the roadmap, it is essential to leverage existing mechanisms and partnerships that can help enable rapid scale-up, effective use of scarce resources, and help to avoid the duplication of efforts. The UNCTAD-led E-Trade for All initiative, which now has 32 collaborating partners, offers a practical example of how digital help desks can work for development. I would also like to highlight that UNCTAD is currently interacting with the resident coordinators in several least developed countries to speed up the implementation of specific recommendations contained in our now more than 25 E-Trade readiness assessments, which are aimed at helping countries to engage in and benefit more from the digital economy.
The UN Group on the Information Society, which is currently chaired by UNDP, is another existing mechanism that can be better leveraged with a view to ensuring coherence and collaboration, also in the context of capacity building. Meeting the challenge of harnessing digitalization for all SDGs requires effective cooperation and less silo thinking. We need to simultaneously address policy challenges in multiple areas, in many countries, and to do so in a scaled-up manner. No single organization has the expertise and capacity to do it alone. And this is why digital cooperation has to help to connect the dots. We look forward to working with ITU, UNDP, and many of our other partners in this area moving forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that statement. They do say third time's the charm, and so this time we will try again, Mr. Sasan Gonega from Paradigm
Initiative. And I'm sure it's working now because
yes, it is. That's great. Thank you so much.
I was actually on the wrong list, and that also speaks to what I actually want to talk about. It's a holiday in Nigeria today. My kids were 5 and 2. If it wasn't for the holiday, they will be online learning right now, picking up new skills, adaptive skills, learning how to learn, becoming more independent. School continues for them. But it's not the same story for the bottom 40%. Earlier, I was in the wrong group. I was, in the wrong section of the chat room, so I couldn't speak. So you can imagine what it's like for the bottom 40%, who are not only in the wrong section of the digital divide, but do not even have internet access to get connected. And there is no way we can talk about building the capacity of the bottom 40% without providing the adequate infrastructure, the required devices, and access that can allow them to get connected. For many of those kids, school will not be open anytime soon. Unfortunately, some of them have forgotten the things they learned before school closed. And while their colleagues on the other side of the world or who are privileged are able to get connected to resources, they will not. We will not achieve our capacity building objective if the bottom 40% do not get the right infrastructure to make capacity building happen, the right kind of access, and the devices. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And we now turn back to USG Horshill for the very last of the roundtables on digital human rights.
Thank you. Well, we were very lucky that we started these more detailed sessions with Michelle Bachelet, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, because one of the themes of the roadmap is that human rights is not an add-on concern. It has to be central to everything we do. It has to be central to all regulation, to all capacity building, to all connectivity work. The nature of the technology has a way of looking at human beings from specific aspects. The way that digital technology is applied in where I live, it very much is through the aspect of me as a consumer. And regardless of whatever application or platform I use, I can rely on being bombarded with advertising for specific products that some sort of algorithm has indicated on the basis of my communications that I may be interested in. And in that process, our rights, our dignity can be a little bit forgotten, or at least not made as central as we would like it to be. And so this is the key area of the Secretary General's roadmap. And there are a series of very concrete recommendations on how we can ensure more consistently human rights are put at the center of digital technologies, digital connectivity. And now I'd like to, we have two very good speakers on this topic. The first is the Ambassador Paike Jia, who is the permanent representative to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva of the Republic of Korea. Korea is a champion, an important champion on this topic, together with OHCHR and Access Now. And we will also have the Executive Director of Access Now, Brett Solomon, talking to us. But let me hand the floor to Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the Republic of Korea in Geneva. Madam, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary General. To begin with, I would like to thank you for organizing today's online dialogue on the implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. While we all realize that digital transformation brings about profound changes to the lives of individuals and the fabric of society, the COVID-19 pandemic has all the more clearly revealed how technologies can present both opportunities and challenges in our efforts to protect human rights and improve human welfare. At this juncture, the launch of the Secretary General's roadmap is indeed a significant milestone, presenting ways forward in enhancing global digital cooperation. Reaffirming our full support for this ongoing initiative, I would like to share with you 3 points that we believe should be considered in its implementation. First, human rights should be put at the center of our overall efforts for digital cooperation as a cross-cutting issue. We believe that a rights-based approach should not be limited to the discussions on digital human rights, but also apply to other key issues such as universal connectivity, digital inclusion, artificial intelligence, and trust and security in cyberspace. This is the reason our roundtable on recommendation 3A and B of the high-level panel has continued efforts to engage with other roundtables on these issues in the last few months. In this vein, I'd like to emphasize the important role of SG's technology envoy to be appointed next year in bringing human rights upfront in the multi-stakeholder policy dialogue that the UN intends to facilitate. Second, we need to involve all relevant stakeholders in an inclusive manner. The rapidly growing influence of the private sector and the complex nature of new technologies make this kind of engagement all the more important. Efforts are also needed in bringing the gap between the human rights community and the tech community, bridging the gap between the human rights community and the tech community. One of the strong advantages of our roundtable process was the participation of diverse stakeholders on an equal footing, which proved crucial in enabling more extensive and robust discussions on digital human rights. I'm pleased to see this approach being also embedded in the roadmap, including in the proposed way forward for the global digital cooperation architecture. Lastly, human rights standards and principles should be respected in full, both online and offline. But there remains a need to review and address the possible normative and protection gaps created by constantly evolving digital technologies. Given that the Human Rights Council is the primary international human rights mechanism, efforts to narrow these gaps should be made in synergy with the work currently being done at the Council. Last year, in particular, the Council adopted the resolution on new and emerging digital technologies and human rights. Based on this resolution, its advisory committee is preparing a report on this subject, and a panel discussion will be held in the upcoming 44th session of the Council. In closing, I would like to commend the Under-Secretary General, other champions, and key constituents for having moved this roundtable forward at this difficult time, and reaffirm our commitment to continue to engage in this process. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope I'll be forgiven for not having mentioned our other champion on this topic, together with Korea, who both our champions have been outstanding. That is, of course, the European Union. And I'd like to hand the floor now to His Excellency, Mr. Ian Gilmore, who is the European Union Special Representative for Human Rights. And then we will go to the third champion, Brett Solomon of Access Now. So, Your Excellency, Eamon Gilmore, over to you.
Hello, you are indeed forgiven, Your Secretary General, and I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity of participating in this event appropriately in a digital meeting room. I'd also like to thank you for organizing the multi-stakeholder consultations over the last months and for taking into account the views of the European Union. This roadmap is a great achievement, which calls on the UN member states, civil society and the private sector to work together to ensure greater connectivity, digital inclusivity, and to foster a digital sphere that complies with human rights. The European Union has been honoured to be one of the co-champions of the roundtable discussing digital and human rights, and we have worked very closely together with the other co-champions, the Republic of Korea, Access Now, and the OHCHR, and all of the key constituents to build a solid set of recommendations. The current pandemic is showing us the great potential that new technologies can have for the fulfillment and protection of human rights. New technologies allow millions of people to have access to education, to access information, to allow citizens to enjoy the right to work or to culture. New technologies also allow us to keep monitoring human rights violations and reporting on them, to be in touch with human rights defenders who are at risk, and with civil society, including in remote areas. While these positive trends should, of course, be acknowledged and developed, strong attention has to be paid to the negative impact of new technologies, such as abuse of mass surveillance, proliferation of hate speech and online harassment, and breaches of the right to privacy. The roadmap establishes key priorities for public authorities and the private sector on surveillance, including facial recognition, internet shutdowns, data protection, due diligence, online harassment. And while it was discussed at another roundtable, we welcome that recommendations were made on ensuring a human rights-based approach to artificial intelligence. This roadmap is but the beginning of a long process of working together to maximize the potential of new technologies so that they provide new means to advocate for, defend, and exercise rights. The European Union looks forward to engaging in the months and years to come with UN agencies, and in particular with the pillar civil society organizations, private sector, and member states to identify best practices of using new technologies to expand our enjoyment of human rights, as well as practices of countering abuses of digital technologies to encroach on human rights. And we believe that the UN is the appropriate forum to have these multi-stakeholder discussions. It is essential to make full use of existing UN human rights mechanisms. UN special procedures, OHCHR, and UN treaty bodies should use their expertise to advise governments on how to make the digital sphere human rights compliant while identifying human rights violations in relation to new technologies. UN member states should ensure that digital human rights are raised during universal periodic reviews, and good cooperation between the OHCHR and the new and to be appointed UN Technology Envoy should be encouraged. The European Union certainly looks forward to cooperating with the new Technology Envoy, including on the growing overlap between human rights and digital technologies and artificial intelligence. The EU is ready to share and to provide its current expertise and experience. Over the last years, we have established strong standards of protecting data privacy through the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR as it is known, also on combating hate speech online through the Code of Conduct, which we have brought forward with social media platforms. The European Union is increasingly raising concerns during human rights dialogues with partner countries about cases of internet shutdowns or of online harassment of human rights defenders. The ministers of our 27 member states just this February reaffirmed that the European Union will continue to promote the right to an open and free internet protect privacy and data protection, and pay particular attention to mass surveillance technologies while actively combating hate speech online, cybercrime, terrorist content online, and disinformation, in full compliance with international human rights law. The EU will promote an ethical and human rights-based approach to the development and application of artificial intelligence. The EU's new action plan for human rights and democracy recognises new technologies as one of our 5 priority areas. In implementing the action plan over the next 5 years, the EU will strive to harness the potential of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, for the better enjoyment of human rights, as well as to tackle challenges connected with the rise of digital technologies. Human rights related to digital technology evolve very quickly. For instance, over the last 2 months, a debate has emerged regarding the development of COVID-19 tracking applications that might lead to breaches of the right to privacy. Accordingly, the EU and its member states have developed an EU toolbox, or policy guidance, that provides guidance to EU governments on the use of mobile applications for contact tracing and warning in response to the coronavirus pandemic. In the years to come, the debate on digital human rights will keep evolving at a high pace. This is why it is key to sustain a vibrant multi-stakeholder debate at all levels. And the European Union is committed to participating actively in identifying global digital solutions informed by human rights. Thank you very much, Undersecretary.
Thank you so much. And the EU's championing, and yours in particular, of human rights in this area and in this era is particularly critical. And I know much of the world looks to the EU for that. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Brett, Access Now, who have long been very active with lots of initiative and drive in this space. Brett, over to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great. Thanks for everyone's patience, and thanks to Fabrizio for moderating the session so well. So my name's Brett Solomon. I'm the Executive Director of Access Now, and I want to actually first acknowledge the centrality of human rights in the roadmap. I think that it's absolutely excellent that after all of these discussions, all of these roundtables, and so much consultation, that the Secretary General and the drafters of the roadmap have put human rights at the very centre and maintained it at that point. Given everything that's happening with COVID and with Black Lives Matters and with the economic imperative of connectivity, as we've seen, that a rights-based digital cooperation has all of those rights as part of the discussion, as a central part of the discussion, from expression to privacy to healthcare to education to water to the right to life, essentially. And I could see potentially that centrality or that focus on rights being pushed to the margins, but having it placed by the roadmap at the centre is excellent to see. I also want to acknowledge that the co-drafters of our roundtable of 3A, 3B, Korea, the European Union, and the OHCHR, and we look forward to implementing the call to action with our partners and with those who we've consulted with around the world. But we need to move it from a roadmap, of course, to something that we drive on, and I think that implementation is absolutely central. A couple of key issues that are within the roadmap that are absolutely important to underline. First one on internet shutdowns. Again, great to see it very much at the centre of the discussion. There were 213 internet shutdowns across 33 countries in 2019. There were 213 internet shutdowns across 33 countries in 2019, and I repeat it because it is such a central point. Benga mentioned about being excluded, and many people are actually intentionally excluded from the network. So a focus on that is important, and I think we also see how shutdowns were identified as a violation of international human rights law, again in the roadmap. I want to raise also the point about shutdowns in the context of COVID, and a number of us wrote to the World Health Organization to say that the shutdowns in Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, Pakistan, and many other countries are actually preventing people from accessing the kind of information that's been discussed by some of the other panelists earlier. Absolutely essential when we think about connectivity, that we also think about the turning off of connectivity and what that does to marginalized populations. Thank you very much also for the focus on 9C, understanding the importance of connectivity to least developed countries. We've heard some of the stats, and they're really quite frightening because it's not just about statistics, it's actually about individuals. And many of those people who are excluded are from racial minorities, from political minorities, gender-based exclusion, etc. So we need to look beyond the numbers and start to look at the actual individuals. And that's why I think that the financing mechanism that's being proposed in the roadmap is so important, and because it's about money, but it's not just about money. It's a power, class, politics, and race issue as well that we need to address. I'd like to raise the relevance of the private sector, which I feel is a little underdone perhaps in this discussion. We've had 32 high-level experts over all of the panels. 2 of those are from the private sector. And I think when we think about the privatization of the digital commons, which is one of the sections that was earlier discussed, we really need to understand the private sector and the importance of them in determining our digital future. And that's why so many of us fought to protect.org, to keep that as as part of the digital commons and ensure that the non-commercial part of the internet remains central to our future. Thanks also for the reference, the many references in the roadmap related to COVID, particularly around things like contact tracing, which was just mentioned by the European Union, the mandate for health surveillance and digital identity programs are very, very central to the work that many of us in civil society are working on to ensure that we can both have healthcare and that we can also have a protection of our civil and political rights going forward. I'd like to, just before I close up, again, underline the issue around online racism, sexism, and other forms of hate and discrimination online. Thanks very much to the Wikipedia representative for mentioning the Black Lives Matter issue. This is a deeply challenging one, I think, for all of us, both as members of the representatives of Black and Brown communities, but also for white allies like myself. We need to actively work on this issue if we're going to have digital cooperation. And I think, for example, this also relates to policing and the way in which we've called for the special session of the Human Rights Council to focus on police violence in the US. So many of these issues are old issues, but they're obviously reignited and having their own challenges in the current context. And I think that also relates to the issue of assembly, association, and protest online. And so I might just close up there with just to say that RightsCon is a summit that will take place on July 27 to 31, and everybody who is in this discussion is welcome to attend. It's rightscon.org. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brett. And your point is very well taken about the need for much greater involvement by the private sector. And that's something we'll certainly promote. And I don't think there's a lack of private sector actors who would get engaged. But I'd like to thank all our extraordinary speakers also for their leadership to get us to where we are today, and the leadership that we will need to translate the roadmap, as Brett says, into a natural road as we move forward. So let me now hand back to Yu Ping to take up the commentaries we have on this. Yu Ping, over to you.
Thank you so much, USG. Before I start with the discussions for this roundtable, we'd also like to ask if anybody else participating would like to make very, very short comments from the floor and has not previously indicated to us. So if you'd like to speak very briefly, and again, I ask again, if everybody keep their statements short, please indicate through the chat now, and then we will be able to call on you later. The first discussion in the digital human rights on this particular issue is actually a direct response to what Brett from Access Now had noted about the need for private sector engagement. And so in our efforts to promote even greater engagement with the private sector, the first discussant is actually Mr. Steve Crown, Vice President for Human Rights at Microsoft. Steve, please.
Okay, thank you. And let me express my thanks to Undersecretary Hochschild, the Republic of Korea, and Access Now. Brett, great to see you again, if only virtually, for co-sponsoring this discussion. And of course, our partners in the UN Office of Human Rights, but also all participants in this dialogue. It is incredibly important. Microsoft has participated actively and deeply in these conversations to date. We are very concerned to see real advance in the SDGs and the protection and advancement of human rights. We'll continue that engagement. And I think I speak for many in the private sector in saying the importance that we attach to this. I'd like to say we do endorse the recommendations from the Office of Human Rights to the Secretary General's roadmap. And actually, I love the fact that we're framing this discussion as part of a roadmap. We are on a journey, and we will need to equip ourselves for sustained and coordinated efforts to achieve really ambitious goals. So I want to focus my comments on just one issue, and it's already been touched upon both by the distinguished speakers from Korea and the European Union, and most recently by Access Now. And that is this notion of multi-stakeholderism. It's no longer enough to think about multilateralism or multiculturalism, multi-this, multi-that. We actually think we need to frame it in terms of the stakeholders who are the real reason that we have the SDGs in the first place. We believe as Microsoft that in order to address in a coordinated and sustained manner the challenge of digital rights in 2020 and the years ahead, we need a 21st century approach. It's no longer as sufficient, especially, but not only in the digital world, to address challenges by having governments speak with governments, academics with academics, civil society with civil society, human rights advocates with their colleagues, companies with companies. And then after these parties have agreed within their own community on what should be done, presenting a plan and inviting feedback, as it were, after the fact from others. We believe as Microsoft that the 21st century digital challenges are global in scope, and they affect all persons in all societies, and that we need to embrace that, all of us working on the SDGs. So across all traditional specialist communities and populations, and that includes those I mentioned, but so many others. So marginalized populations, youth, women, refugees, to name a few. We need to partner deeply, and I have some concrete suggestions. This should reach at the very beginning of the process. It should be part of the problem definition. It should continue through strategy development and through implementation of solutions that are intentionally designed to allow and call upon stakeholders to build on the work of each other. That's the path by which we can actually hope to develop strategies and solutions that will in fact be as inclusive and as ambitious as the SDGs call us to be. So you will see Microsoft engage in just that way. We're ready to partner with anyone and everyone to achieve these goals. I can assure you the private sector will not be missing. The question is how we can do more to more effectively improve the work that we all do together across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for a truly inspiring statement. I have an indication from the floor that Carolina Rossini from the Portulans Institute would like to take the floor quickly. Carolina, please.
Sure, thank you. I hope you can hear me well. So first, thank you for the invitation to join this group. It's wonderful to see so many longtime friends and experts here. Portulans Institute is a new think tank based in DC. We exist in December, but we bring a lot of expertise of building country assessments for over 2 decades to the space with the Network Readiness Index, the Global Innovation Index, and the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. So what I want to actually highlight based on the data we collect with these indexes is that the countries with better human rights protections are actually the countries that also do better in innovation, talent competitiveness, and technology readiness. It's very interesting to see that the countries with the least amount of shutdowns, for example, are also the countries with better digital skills. The GTCI, which is published with INSEAD in Europe, for example, was focused on artificial intelligence last year. And it's clear that artificial intelligence skills, it's a core set of skills for the new generation. We are actually working with the European Commission on building a new set of digital skills for European citizens on AI. And we see that that training actually happens when you have good access to technology, when you are not disconnected, as our friend from Nigeria mentioned. And it's just wonderful to see that the countries that have adopted policies, even at the constitutional level, as South Korea has done, are the countries doing better on those indexes. So I just want to highlight this core relationship between innovation, technology readiness, and talent competitiveness globally, especially for the fourth industrial revolution challenges with human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Carolina. That I think wraps up our discussions and interventions from the floor. Again, I want to thank everybody for keeping the statement short and bearing with me as I try very hard to try and moderate the time. I'm glad to say I think we will probably be ending on time now. Let us now turn back to US Chief Fabricio Hochschild for his closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating. Thank you especially to our very distinguished speakers. I must say many of you have expressed some kind words about the roadmap, and I have to make that praise rebound because this roadmap really was a common effort. Of course, it represents the SG vision, and any criticism or unhappiness we get, the responsibility lies exclusively with the SG and those of us who support him. But having said that, the roadmap is the closest we have to a multi-stakeholder vision of how we should move forward. A truly inclusive vision of not only different stakeholder groups, but also different regions. And I'm proud that we managed to coordinate that effort. I'm very proud of the exceptional team who made this possible. But I have to acknowledge too that taking that vision and making it a reality will really depend on the continued coordinated efforts of all. I mean, Steve of Microsoft spoke of sustained and coordinated efforts, and I think that's absolutely critical. Forgive me for mixing metaphors, but I think to actually implement the roadmap is going to be much more of a marathon than a sprint. The overall international environment has some conducive elements, but much of it is not particularly conducive. We have to be frank about that. The whole resourcing issue is going to grow more difficult in a post-COVID environment, and we have to be frank about that. So we really count on sustaining the partnership that made this roadmap possible, and increasing our sustained and scaling up, I should say, not just sustaining them, scaling up our joint efforts to make this a reality. I mean, Doreen, who with her team and with her organization has been so critical, Doreen of ITU, of bringing us where we are today, quoted the comment of the OECD chair, Angel Gurria, yesterday, who said there's no better moment to close the digital gap. I mean, I would say there's no other moment to close the digital gap. If we don't do it now, it's simply not going to happen. If we don't pay greater attention to these issues now and to change the drift we're going in, we will end up with an internet that magnifies inequality. We will end up with digital technologies that leave us, or many of us, less secure. And we will end up with digital technologies that, for many, undermine rather than further human rights. So for the moment, for course rectification where it is required is really now. Now is the moment where it's still within our power to have that course correction. And I think we will go down in history depending whether we are able to get our act together and work better together, coordinate better our efforts, we will determine whether we go down in history as the generation that betrayed the great promise of the internet, or whether we go down in history as the generation that realized its potential and made sure that potential was there for all. So I really hope we can continue working closely. We are a small team here, but we will do everything from our side. And we have a very committed group of people and a very committed Secretary General. And we will do everything from our side to steer through the many obstacles we will inevitably find in our way to try and make this incredible partnership bear further fruit in the implementation of the roadmap. So once again, thank you. And I really look forward to the continued journey together. You're on mute, dear Yuping. You're on mute.
And of course, it has to end like that. Thank you very much, everybody. We will see everybody on Monday again. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.